Far beneath the surface of the restless sea, where sunlight fades into silence and time itself seems to drift without direction, there exists a world untouched by human memory, a world where the waters breathe slowly, where ancient currents carry whispers older than the stars, and where a god does not rule with noise, but with presence. He does not speak often. He does not need to. For every wave that reaches the shore, every tide that rises and falls in quiet rhythm, is already his voice. This is the story of Poseidon, not as a god of storms, but as something far older, far deeper, and far more eternal. If this kind of storytelling brings you inner peace, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where in the world are you listening from, and what time it is for you right now. It's always strangely comforting to know who else is out there closing their eyes to the same story. So settle in. Let the world grow quiet, and let's dream together for a while. Before there were coasts to measure distance, before the language of waves found its rhythm against stone, there existed only a vastness without edge or memory. It was not yet the sea as mortals would come to know it, but something older, quieter, an unformed expanse that neither moved nor rested, suspended in a kind of patient stillness. In those earliest imaginings of the world, there was no distinction between above and below, no horizon to separate what could be seen from what must be believed. The ancients would later call this beginning chaos, though not in the sense of disorder, but rather as a state without definition. A place where everything waited to become something, and nothing yet knew its name. Water, in its first conception, was not bound to rivers or oceans. It did not flow. It simply was, deep, heavy, and without voice. It held within it the possibility of movement, but no impulse yet stirred it. There were no winds to trouble its surface, no moon to pull it into longing. It existed in silence, as though listening for something that had not yet been spoken. One might imagine it as a dark mirror stretching endlessly in all directions, though even reflection requires light, and light had not yet taken form. So the waters remained unseen, unknowable, and undisturbed. Time itself had not yet found a way to pass. There were no moments, only a continuous presence. It is within this stillness that the earliest myths begin to breathe. For the storytellers who came much later, those who sat beside fires and looked out toward the restless horizon, the sea was never just water. It was memory. It was origin. It was the place from which all things emerged, and perhaps the place to which all things would quietly return. And so, when they spoke of the beginning, they spoke not of land or sky, but of something deeper, something more ancient than both. They spoke of a primordial vastness that preceded even the gods. In these early imaginings, the sea did not yet belong to anyone. There was no ruler beneath its surface, no hand to shape its currents or stir its depths. It existed in a kind of solitude, untouched by intention. And yet, within that solitude, there was a quiet anticipation, as if the waters themselves were waiting to be awakened. The Greeks would later name the first of these watery beings Oceanus, a titan who encircled the world like a living boundary. But even Oceanus was not the beginning. He was a form given to something older, something that could not easily be contained within a single figure. The true origin of the sea was less a being and more a condition, a state of existence where everything remained unresolved. And in that unresolved state there was a kind of purity. No storms yet rose to break the surface. No waves yet carried ships toward distant lands. There were no depths to fear, no creatures to imagine lurking in the unseen. The water held no secrets, because there was no one yet to seek them. It simply existed, vast and indivisible. It is tempting, from the perspective of a world filled with motion and sound, to see this stillness as emptiness. But the ancient mind did not see it that way. To them, this quiet beginning was not a void, but a fullness beyond comprehension, a place where all possibilities rested together, undisturbed. In time, of course, this stillness would not remain. Something would shift, a presence would emerge. The waters would begin to move, not with violence, but with a slow and deliberate awakening. From that awakening, distinctions would form, sky and sea, light and shadow, surface and depth, and within those distinctions the first gods would take shape. But before any of that, there was only this, a boundless expanse, untouched by wind or will, a silence so complete that even the idea of sound had not yet been imagined. A sea before the sea, and perhaps, in some quiet way, that ancient stillness has never entirely disappeared. Even now, beneath the restless motion of waves, beyond the reach of light and the noise of storms, there remains a depth that remembers what it was before the world began to speak. A place where movement slows, where sound fades, and where the waters return to something closer to their original state, calm, patient, and unknowable. It is from this depth, this quiet origin, that the story of Poseidon will eventually rise, not as a sudden force, but as a gradual becoming, a shaping of something that was always there, waiting beneath the surface. But for now, the waters remain still, and in that stillness, the world has not yet chosen its form. From that long and unbroken stillness, something began, though not as a sudden event, nor as a rupture in silence. It was quieter than that, more like a slow remembering than a beginning. The ancient waters, once without motion, seemed to lean into themselves, as though stirred by a distant and unspoken intention. There was no sound to mark the moment, no dividing line to separate what had been from what would follow. And yet, in the language of myth, this is where creation takes its first breath. The Greeks would later speak of chaos as the origin of all things, not disorder, but a vast openness, a condition where form had not yet taken hold. From this openness came the earliest presences, not born in the way mortals understand birth, but emerging as natural expressions of existence itself. Among them was Gaia, the earth, who rose not from above or below, but as a quiet solidity within the endless expanse. She did not break the waters, nor displace them. Instead, she gave them something they had never known before. A boundary, where once there had been only depth without distinction, there was now a surface, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. The waters did not resist this change. They folded around it, accepting the presence of form without losing their own nature. It was not conflict, but coexistence. And then, from that same unfolding, came Uranus, the sky. He stretched above Gaia, vast and unending, mirroring the depth below with a different kind of infinity. Between them, something delicate formed, a space where existence could begin to take shape. It is here, in this quiet arrangement, that the waters first found their purpose. No longer an undivided whole, they began to gather, to settle into places defined by the presence of earth and sky. They flowed, not with urgency, but with a kind of natural inclination, as though guided by the contours of a world that was still learning how to exist. The first currents were gentle. There were no storms to disturb them, no winds to give them direction. Movement came from within, a slow shifting that suggested awareness, though not yet intention. The waters began to recognize themselves, not as a single, endless mass, but as something capable of change. And with that recognition came the earliest forms of separation. Some waters sank deeper, drawn into the hidden places beneath Gaia's surface, where light would never reach. Others remained above, spreading outward, touching the edges of the forming land. These were the beginnings of seas, not yet named, not yet ruled, but distinct from the depths that lay below. In time, the ancients would give names to these forces. They spoke of Pontus, the deep sea itself, born from Gaia without union, a presence that embodied the vast, unknowable waters. Pontus was not a ruler, nor a creator in the traditional sense. He was the sea as it first came into being, quiet, immense, and without need for recognition. Alongside him flowed Oceanus, whose waters were said to circle the world like a boundary without walls. If Pontus was depth, Oceanus was distance, the idea that the waters could stretch endlessly, defining the limits of the known and the unknown. These were not gods of personality or story, not yet. They did not command or intervene. They existed as conditions of the world itself, as natural as the rising of land or the stretching of sky. But even in their stillness, there was a quiet shift taking place. The waters, once content in their silent presence, began to respond to the world around them. The sky above, though still and vast, carried within it the potential for change, and the earth below, though stable, was not without movement. These subtle influences began to shape the waters in ways that could not yet be seen, but could perhaps be felt. There is a certain inevitability in this transformation. For water, by its nature, does not remain still forever. It gathers, it moves, it seeks. Even in the absence of wind or tide, it carries within it the possibility of motion. And as the world continued to unfold, that possibility began to take form. The first ripples would have been almost imperceptible, a slight disturbance across a surface that had long known only calm, not caused by storm or force, but by the simple presence of existence pressing against itself. It is difficult to imagine such a moment, for it lacks the drama we often associate with beginnings. And yet, it is perhaps more profound for that very reason. Because in that gentle movement, the waters began to change from what they had been into what they would become. They were no longer just a presence, they were becoming a force. And with that becoming came the quiet anticipation of something more. Not yet a god, not yet a will, but the suggestion that the sea might one day belong to something, or someone. A presence that would not simply exist within the waters, but would shape them, stir them, and give them voice. That presence had not yet risen. But the waters were no longer waiting in silence. They had begun to move. And once movement begins, it does not easily return to stillness. The early world did not remain untouched by strain. What had once unfolded in quiet emergence began, almost imperceptibly, to tighten beneath its own weight. Creation, even in its most gentle form, does not remain at rest forever. It gathers, it deepens, and in time, it asks to change. Gaia, vast and enduring, had brought forth many forms from her own being. With Uranus stretched endlessly above her, their union filled the world with presence, titans who carried within them the first echoes of structure and power. These were not yet the gods of temples and stories, but something older, closer to the bones of existence itself. And yet, the sky grew distant. Uranus, in his unbroken expanse, began to press downward, holding his children close, too close, denying them the space to fully emerge. It was not an act of sudden cruelty, but of quiet fear, a resistance to what change might bring. The earth endured him in silence, but silence, as it often does, began to gather weight. There is a certain tension in what is restrained, a pressure that does not announce itself, but grows steadily beneath the surface. Gaia, who had once welcomed all forms into being, now held within her something unresolved, a longing not for rebellion, but for release. It was from this quiet insistence that Cronus emerged. He was not the loudest of them, nor the most radiant, but he carried within him a stillness that could act, and when the moment came, it did not arrive with thunder or spectacle. It came like a single movement breaking a long-held breath. With a blade shaped from the earth itself, Cronus separated sky from land. The world did not shatter, it opened. For the first time, there was space. Uranus withdrew, no longer pressed against Gaia, and the children who had been hidden found room to exist. The air, if it could yet be called that, felt wider. The waters below seemed to deepen in response, as though recognizing that the world had shifted. And in that shift, Cronus took his place. He became the bearer of order, not through creation, but through inheritance. The world moved forward under his quiet rule, and for a time there was something almost peaceful in this new arrangement. But what is inherited often carries memory within it. For Cronus, the act that had freed him did not fade. It remained, like a reflection that cannot be fully turned away from. And with it came a knowledge that settled heavily. What had happened once could happen again. A prophecy, soft yet unyielding, reached him, that he too would be undone by his own children. Fear, when it is quiet, can be more enduring than when it is loud. And so, when his children were born to Rhea, he did not greet them with wonder. He received them with a kind of stillness that concealed intention. One by one they came into the world. Hestia, whose presence might have brought warmth. Demeter, who would one day understand the rhythms of growth. Hera, whose gaze would hold both devotion and distance. Each arrival followed by the same quiet act. Cronus swallowed them, not in rage nor in haste, but with a certainty that felt almost ritualistic, as though by returning them to himself he could hold back the future. And then, in time, another child was born. Poseidon. There was no storm to mark his coming, no trembling of the earth, no sudden rising of waves. The sea, still in its early forming, did not yet know how to announce such a presence. His birth passed as the others had, quiet, uncelebrated, nearly unseen, and like those before him, he was taken. Before the world could touch him, before breath could become voice, Poseidon was drawn into the same darkness, swallowed into a place where light had never reached, where time seemed to fold inward rather than move forward. It is a beginning shaped by absence, a god of the sea, not born into motion, but into stillness. Not rising with the tide, but held beneath it, contained, waiting, unformed. There is something of the ocean in this. For even the sea, in its earliest memory, was not movement, but silence, a vast presence without wave or current. Poseidon's first existence echoes that ancient state. Not yet the force that would one day stir storms, but something deeper, something held. Within that darkness, he was not alone. His siblings, swallowed before him, remained, not as figures moving through space, but as presences suspended in a kind of quiet endurance. It is not a place described in detail, perhaps because it resists form. A realm not of action, but of waiting. And yet, within that waiting, nothing was lost. What is held does not always fade. Sometimes it gathers. Rhea, watching this pattern repeat, did not speak loudly against it. Her grief did not take the form of visible resistance, but something quieter, more deliberate. She witnessed each absence, each quiet vanishing, and carried within her a knowing that the world was not meant to remain this way. But for now, the pattern held. Above, the waters continued their slow becoming, gathering, shifting, finding shape against the edges of the earth. They moved without knowing why, as though guided by something not yet present. Below, in a silence that mirrored the beginning of all things, Poseidon remained, not gone, not diminished, only waiting, and like the sea before its first wave, he carried within him a force that had not yet found its moment. The world continued, unaware of what it held beneath its surface, but the stillness would not last forever. In the hidden stillness, where time did not pass in any familiar sense, the children of Cronus remained. They were not asleep, nor awake, not living as mortals understand life, nor absent in the way of something lost. Their existence belonged to a quieter condition, one that resembled the earliest state of the world itself, a presence without movement, a being without expression. And yet, even in that silence, something endured between them. A kind of nearness. It would be too simple to call it companionship, for there were no words, no gestures, no shared glances in the dark. But they were not alone. Each one existed alongside the others, as though suspended within the same unspoken awareness. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, and among them, Poseidon. There was no hierarchy here, no ruler, no domain, only presence. If the world above had begun to take shape, earth stretching, waters gathering, sky widening, this place remained untouched by such distinctions. It was closer to the origin, to that first quiet state before form insisted upon itself. And yet, something subtle began to emerge. Not action, not yet, but awareness. It is difficult to imagine what it means for gods, not yet awakened, to become aware. There were no thoughts in the way mortals would later understand them, no memories to reflect upon, no language to give shape to experience. And still there was a sense, faint, almost indistinguishable from the silence itself, that they were not simply nothing. They were becoming. Among them, Poseidon carried a presence that did not yet have direction, but already held weight. If Zeus, still hidden elsewhere, would one day be associated with the sky's vast authority and Hades with the unseen depths, Poseidon's nature was forming in a quieter way, less defined, but no less certain. He belonged to something that moved. Even here, in a place without motion, there was within him the suggestion of it. Not yet waves, not yet tides, but the possibility of both, a kind of inner current waiting not to begin, but to be released. It is perhaps not coincidence that the sea itself, above this hidden stillness, was undergoing its own slow transformation. The waters, once silent and without distinction, had begun to gather into forms. There were surfaces now, and depths. There were places where the water lingered, and places where it pressed forward, though no wind yet guided it. Movement was becoming inevitable. And in that inevitability, Poseidon's nature found its reflection. The ancients, looking back upon these stories, might say that the gods were shaped by the world, just as the world was shaped by them. That what existed in potential below would one day rise to meet what had already begun above. But in this moment, there was no rising yet, only waiting. There is something almost solemn in this stage of the myth, a pause that stretches longer than expected, as though the world itself hesitates before allowing what must come next. It is not tension in the way of conflict, but in the way of anticipation, a quiet gathering before change. Above, Cronus continued his reign. His rule was not chaotic, nor visibly cruel. The world did not fracture under him. The waters did not rage, the sky did not fall. Everything remained, on the surface, in balance. And yet, Beneath that balance, something was unresolved, for what is contained cannot remain contained forever. Rhea, who had watched each of her children disappear into silence, carried within her a knowing that could not be undone. It did not rise as anger, nor as rebellion in its loudest form. It remained quiet, deliberate, like the slow turning of a tide that has not yet reached the shore. Somewhere beyond this hidden stillness another child would be born. Zeus. But here, within this unseen place, the brothers and sisters remained as they were, unmoving, yet not unchanged. If there was any connection between them, it was not spoken. It was something closer to alignment, a shared existence that did not require recognition, and among them Poseidon continued to gather into himself. Not power, not yet, but presence. The kind that does not announce itself, but cannot be ignored once it rises. The sea too does this. It does not always begin with a storm. Sometimes it begins with a shift so subtle it goes unnoticed, a quiet pulling, a slight movement beneath the surface, and only later does it reveal what it has become. So it was with Poseidon. Even in stillness, he was not unchanged. Even in silence, he was not empty. He was waiting, not for permission, but for the moment when waiting would no longer be necessary. And when that moment came, it would not belong to him alone, it would belong to all of them. For what had been held together in silence would soon move as one. It did not begin with a clash. There was no sudden fracture in the world, no thunder to declare that something irreversible had started. The shift came quietly, as so many changes had before it, not as a break, but as a turning. Far from the stillness where the swallowed children remained, Zeus had been hidden away, beyond the reach of his father's knowing. His beginning, unlike that of his siblings, had not been folded into silence. He had been given space, small, fragile, but enough, and in that space something grew. Not merely strength, though that would come, but awareness shaped by distance. Zeus did not inherit the quiet suspension of his brothers and sisters. He inherited absence, the knowledge that something had been taken, and that it remained somewhere beyond his reach. This knowledge did not arrive as anger. It settled more slowly, like a realization that cannot be undone once it is seen. The world he observed seemed whole. Cronus held dominion without visible unrest. The sky did not resist him. The earth did not fracture beneath him. The waters moved in their early rhythms, untouched by storm. Everything appeared as it should be. And yet, something was missing. It is often the unseen absence that shapes what follows. Zeus, guided by a quiet determination rather than sudden defiance, began to move toward what had been concealed. The myths would later speak of cunning, of alliances formed in whispers, of a plan carried out not through force alone, but through patience. There was no single moment where the world declared itself at war. Instead, there was a gradual unmaking of what had been held in place. Through means both subtle and inevitable, Zeus brought about the return of those who had been swallowed. One by one, the silence that had contained them was undone. What had been hidden began, slowly, to emerge. Hestia returned, then Demeter, then Hera, and with them, from that same long stillness, came Poseidon. There was no cry to mark his return, no surge of water rising to greet him. The sea did not yet know how to answer to him. His emergence was as quiet as his beginning, yet it carried with it the weight of everything that had been waiting. To be released from such a silence is not to immediately act. There is a moment, brief but profound, where existence must adjust to itself again, where what has been held in stillness begins to remember motion. Poseidon did not rise in fury, he rose in presence. The world, though unchanged in appearance, had begun to shift beneath its own surface. The return of the swallowed gods did not announce itself as a declaration, but as a rebalancing. What had been contained was now part of the whole again, and it is from such rebalancing that conflict often emerges. The Titans, vast and enduring, did not yield their place easily. They were not invaders, nor usurpers. They were what the world had been. Their existence was not an error to be corrected, but a state that had reached its limit. The war that followed, the one later called the Titanomachy, did not echo in the way mortal wars do. It was not a series of battles marked by victory and defeat, but a long and unfolding tension between what was and what would be. The earth felt it not as destruction, but as pressure. The sky did not tear, but seemed to stretch further. Even the waters, still young in their movement, carried a subtle unrest, as though aware that something within the world had begun to change direction. Poseidon, newly returned, did not stand apart from this. He was not yet the master of seas, nor the wielder of storms. But he was no longer contained, and in that simple fact there was already a shift. He stood among his siblings, not above them, not beneath them, but alongside. A presence shaped by silence, now placed within motion. If Zeus carried the clarity of sky, and others carried their own unfolding natures, Poseidon held something deeper. Less visible, perhaps, but no less essential. A connection to what moves beneath, to what does not always reveal itself at once. The war did not rush. It moved like a tide, advancing, retreating, gathering strength not through speed, but through inevitability. Each moment folding into the next, until resistance itself began to feel like something that could not last forever. There is a quiet truth within this. That change, even when resisted, does not always arrive as force. Sometimes it arrives as persistence. And so the world continued through this long, echoing shift, not shattered, but reshaped, not destroyed, but redefined. And within it, Poseidon remained, not yet fully revealed, but no longer hidden. The silence that had once contained him was gone. What would follow would not return to stillness. When the long tension of the world finally began to settle, it did not end in a single moment. There was no clear line where conflict ceased and peace began. Instead, there came a gradual quieting, as though the world, having stretched itself to its limits, slowly exhaled. The forces that had once pressed against one another began to loosen their hold, not in defeat, but in recognition that something had already changed. The Titans, vast and enduring, receded from their place, not erased, not forgotten, but set aside, like an older memory that no longer directs the present. The shape of the cosmos remained, but its balance had shifted, and in that shifting, a question emerged, not spoken aloud, but felt across the expanse of existence itself. How should the world now be held? For the first time, the gods who had once existed in silence stood within a world that required structure. Not the silent containment of before, but a division, one that would define not only their realms, but their nature. It is often said that Zeus, Poseidon and Hades gathered to decide this, but the word decide may be too deliberate. What followed was not an argument, nor a contest of will. It was something quieter, almost ritualistic, a recognition that the world in its vastness could not remain undivided, that each of them carried within them an affinity, a direction toward which they naturally inclined. And so, the division came not through conquest, but through chance shaped by inevitability. Lots were drawn, a simple act, almost understated in its form. And yet within it lay the arrangement of the cosmos itself. To Zeus fell the sky, an endless expanse, open and unbounded, reflecting the clarity and distance he carried within him. The realm above, where light would move freely and where authority would be visible, unquestioned. To Hades fell the underworld, not a place of punishment as it would later be imagined, but a realm of quiet depth, a place beneath the surface where all things would eventually return, not in chaos, but in stillness. A domain of endings that were not abrupt, but inevitable. And to Poseidon. The sea. It is easy, from a distance, to see this as a simple assignment, as though the waters were merely one part of the world given to one among many. But the sea was not a single thing. It was movement, it was depth. It was distance without boundary and force without form. Unlike the sky, which stretched above, or the underworld which rested below, the sea existed in constant relation to land, to wind, to the unseen pull of distant forces. It did not remain still. It could not be contained in the same way. And so, Poseidon did not inherit a static realm. He inherited something that would always be in motion. There is a quiet significance in this, for Poseidon himself had been shaped in stillness, held in silence, suspended without expression. And now he was given dominion over that which could never remain still. It is not difficult to imagine the adjustment this required. The sea, though already forming its rhythms, had not yet found its voice. Its movements were subtle, its currents unspoken. But now, with a presence to shape it, that would begin to change. Poseidon did not claim the waters with a declaration. He entered them, not as an outsider, but as something returning to what had always, in some quiet way, been his. The surface did not break at his arrival. The depths did not recoil. Instead, there was a kind of recognition, subtle, but unmistakable. The waters began to respond. At first it was barely perceptible, a shift in the way they gathered, a slight insistence in their motion. The sea, once content in its slow becoming, now carried within it a direction. It began to move with purpose. This was not yet the sea of storms and crashing waves, not yet the force that would shape coastlines and swallow ships. It remained vast, patient, and largely calm. But something had changed. The waters were no longer without a voice. And that voice belonged to Poseidon. Above, the sky stretched endlessly under Zeus, bright and watchful. Below, the underworld settled into its quiet permanence under Hades, and between them, touching both yet belonging fully to neither, the sea began to take on its true nature. A realm of connection and separation, a boundary and a bridge, a place where the known world ended and something else began. The division of the world did not create order in the way mortals might expect. It did not simplify existence or remove its uncertainties. Instead, it gave form to them. It allowed each part of the cosmos to become more fully itself. And for Poseidon, that meant becoming something vast, not fixed, not predictable, but enduring. The sea would never be entirely calm again, and it would never be entirely at rest. For it now carried within it the will of a god who had once known only stillness and who would never return to it. At first, it was almost nothing, a slight movement across the surface, so subtle that it might have gone unnoticed if there had been eyes to witness it. The sea, vast and newly claimed, did not immediately rise into its full nature. It lingered in a quiet transition, as though remembering what it had once been before learning what it could become. Poseidon did not command it to move. He did not raise his hand or speak a word that would stir its depths. His presence alone was enough, not as force, but as alignment, like a current that begins not from a push, but from a shift within the water itself. The sea responded slowly. There is a patience in water that resists sudden change. It gathers its motion, allows it to form, and only then does it begin to move. And so, beneath a sky that remained wide and silent under Zeus, the surface of the sea began its first true transformation. A ripple. It moved outward without urgency, a gentle rise and fall that carried no sound. There was no shore yet to receive it, no land to interrupt its path. It travelled across open water, uninterrupted, its form holding for a moment before softening back into the whole. But it did not disappear, for as one ripple faded, another followed. Not identical, not repeated, but connected. The sea had begun to discover rhythm. Poseidon stood within this quiet emergence, neither separate from it nor entirely within it. He did not shape each movement, but he allowed it, and in allowing, he became part of it. It is often imagined that gods impose their will upon the world, bending it into form, but the sea does not bend easily. It listens, it absorbs, it reflects, and Poseidon, more than any other, would come to understand this. The second movement was stronger, not violent, not yet, but more certain. The surface rose higher, held its shape a moment longer before returning. And then again. Each motion building, not in force, but in consistency. This was the beginning of the wave, a form that would come to define the sea, though in this early moment it remained fragile, almost uncertain of itself. It rose, it fell, it returned, again and again, until the repetition itself became meaning. There is something deeply ancient in rhythm. Before language, before memory, there is repetition. A pattern that does not need to be understood to be felt. The sea, in discovering its waves, was discovering its voice, and Poseidon, standing within it, became that voice's keeper. The waters beneath the surface began to respond as well. Where once there had been only depth without distinction, now there were layers, currents moving beneath currents, unseen yet present. The sea was no longer a single body, but a living system of motion. It is here that one begins to sense the true nature of Poseidon, not merely as a ruler, but as something intertwined with what he governs. The wave was not created in a single act. It was revealed, drawn out from the potential that had always existed within the water. And once revealed, it could not be undone. The sea would never again return to stillness. Even in its calmest moments, there would always be motion beneath the surface. A subtle shifting, a quiet rising and falling that spoke of something deeper than what could be seen. The first wave did not crash. It did not break against rock or foam into air. There was no shore yet to define its end. It existed fully within itself, a complete movement, unbroken, uninterrupted. But it carried within it the possibility of something more. For once the sea learns to rise, it will one day learn to fall with force. That moment had not yet come. For now, the waves remained gentle, their rhythm steady and unhurried. They moved across the vastness of the sea, shaping it not through power, but through persistence. Poseidon did not rush this becoming. He allowed the sea to find itself, just as he himself had once been held in a state of waiting. There is a certain understanding that comes from such beginnings, a patience that does not demand immediate expression, and yet, within that patience, there is always a quiet awareness, that what begins softly does not always remain so. The waves continued, one after another, rising and falling, their motion spreading across the endless surface. The sea had found its breath, a slow, steady rhythm that would carry through all that was yet to come. Above, the sky remained distant. Below, the depths remained dark and largely untouched. But between them, the sea had begun to speak. Not in words, not in sound, but in movement, and that movement would never truly cease. For the first wave is not a single moment, it is a beginning that continues, endlessly. The waves, once begun, did not remain alone. They moved across the surface in quiet succession, rising and falling in patterns that seemed at first without direction. And yet, beneath their repetition, something deeper began to gather, something slower, more deliberate, less visible to the eye. For while the waves spoke of motion, the tides would speak of time. It is a subtle distinction. A wave rises and falls in a moment, its life brief, its shape fleeting. But a tide does not belong to a single instant. It unfolds gradually, almost imperceptibly, shaping the sea not through sudden movement, but through return. In those early days of the world, there was not yet a shore to measure this change. No line of sand or stone to mark where the water had been and where it would go. The sea stretched outward without interruption, its edges undefined. And yet, even without boundaries, it began to shift. The waters did not simply rise and fall in place. They leaned, they gathered, they withdrew. At first, the change was so slow it might have seemed like stillness. A slight swelling across the surface, followed by an equally gentle retreat. But unlike the waves, which repeated without memory, this movement carried a sense of return. The sea was beginning to remember itself. Poseidon, who had watched the first waves take form, now stood within something more enduring. The rhythm unfolding before him was not something that could be shaped in a single moment. It required patience, a kind of listening that extended beyond immediate motion. He did not force the tides into being, he allowed them. There is a quiet understanding in this, that not all power is expressed through action. Some forms of power emerge through alignment, through the recognition of patterns that already exist, and the willingness to let them unfold. The ancients, in their later reflections, would look upward to explain this movement. They would speak of Selene, whose silent passage across the sky was believed to draw the waters toward her, a distant presence, neither touching the sea nor speaking to it, yet influencing it all the same. Whether this was cause or interpretation mattered little. What mattered was the recognition that the sea did not move alone. It responded. To what, it was not always clear. The sky above remained vast and largely unchanged. Zeus held his dominion without interference. His presence felt more in distance than in motion. And yet, the sea beneath him began to move in ways that suggested connection. A rising, a falling, not in isolation, but in relation. This was the beginning of the tide. Unlike the waves which danced across the surface, the tides reached deeper. They pulled at the very body of the sea, shifting its weight, redistributing its vastness across itself. It was not visible in a single glance, but over time its effect became undeniable. The waters would gather as though drawn towards something unseen. Then, just as slowly, they would release. This movement did not disrupt the waves, it carried them. The surface continued its gentle rhythm, but beneath it a larger pattern had begun to assert itself. A pattern that would not be hurried and would not be stopped. Poseidon, in this, became not a master of moments, but of cycles. There is a difference. To command a wave is to shape something brief, something immediate. But to hold dominion over tides is to understand duration, to exist not only in motion, but in return. And return is a quieter form of power. The sea, through its tides, began to define itself not just by what it did, but by what it repeated. Each rise carried the memory of the last. Each fall anticipated the next. It was no longer a collection of movements, but a continuity, a rhythm. It is perhaps here that the sea became something more than water. It became time made visible. not in the measured way of the sky's light and dark, but in a slower, deeper sense. A time that could not be counted, only felt. A time that returned not to repeat, but to continue. The absence of shores did not diminish this rhythm. If anything, it made it more profound. Without boundaries to mark it, the tide existed entirely within itself, its movement defined not by where it ended, but by the fact that it always came back. This is what made it enduring. And Poseidon, standing within this vast and patient motion, became something more than a presence. He became a constant, not unchanging, but unwavering, a force that did not need to announce itself, because it was always there, in every rise, in every fall, in every quiet return of the sea to itself. The tides continued, slow, deliberate, and unbroken. They did not rush toward an end, nor did they seek one. They simply moved, as they would always move, carrying within them the quiet certainty that what departs will return, and what returns will one day depart again. The sea had found its deeper rhythm, and in that rhythm something infinite had begun. Beneath the slow breathing of the tides, below the shifting light that touched only the uppermost skin of the sea, there remained a depth that had not yet been shaped. It was older than the waves, older, even, than the first movement of the waters, a place where light did not reach, not because it was denied, but because it had never been invited. The surface above carried motion, reflection, and rhythm, but below there was only a vast and patient stillness, unchanged since the earliest moment of creation. This was where Poseidon turned, not upward, toward the sky that belonged to Zeus, nor downward in the sense of descent into shadowed endings, where Hades held his quiet dominion. The sea was neither above nor below in the way those realms were defined. It existed between, and within that between there was a place that called to him, not with sound, but with recognition. The depths. Poseidon did not arrive there as an intruder. He did not break through layers or force his way into hidden spaces. He descended as something returning, as though the silence below had always held a place shaped for him. The deeper he moved, the less the sea resembled what it had been above. The rhythm of waves faded. The pull of tides softened. Even the sense of movement, so constant at the surface, grew distant, until it felt less like motion and more like memory. Here, the waters did not speak in patterns. They held themselves in quiet suspension, vast and unmoving. It was a stillness that did not resist him. It accepted. And within that acceptance, something began to take form. The idea of a palace, as later told in myth, is perhaps too defined for what first emerged. There were no walls raised in a single act, no pillars carved with intention. Instead, there was a shaping, gradual, almost imperceptible. The sea itself began to gather, not as waves, but as structure. Stone, long hidden beneath the waters, revealed its presence. Not through upheaval, but through quiet alignment. Forms began to emerge from what had once been formless. Arches suggested rather than built vast open spaces that felt less constructed and more discovered. The ancients would later speak of halls of coral and columns of shell, of a palace that shimmered with the muted light of the sea. But these descriptions, though vivid, only touched the surface of something deeper. For Poseidon's domain was not merely a place, it was a state of being. The palace beneath the surface was not separate from the sea. It was the sea, arranged into stillness. A reflection of what the waters became when they ceased their endless motion and allowed themselves to rest. And in that resting, there was clarity. Poseidon, who had come from silence and risen into movement, now stood within both. The waves above carried his presence outward, but here, in the depths, he encountered something closer to his origin, a quiet that did not erase him, but defined him. There is a certain solitude in this, not loneliness, but a distance from all that is visible. The world above, with its growing forms and emerging boundaries, felt far away here. The sky, though vast, had no reach in this place. Even the tides, so constant in their return, seemed to pause at the threshold of this deeper stillness. And yet it was not empty. There were shapes that had not yet found names, movements so slow they bordered on stillness. The suggestion of life, not yet fully revealed, but present in ways that could not be ignored. The sea, even in its quietest depths, was not without presence. It simply expressed itself differently. Poseidon did not command this place. He belonged to it. The palace, if it can be called that, did not rise above the sea like a monument. It settled within it, inseparable from the waters that surrounded it. There was no boundary between domain and ruler, no distinction between structure and environment. It was all one. This is perhaps why the sea has always resisted full understanding. It cannot be separated into parts without losing something essential. Its surface, its depths, its movements, and its stillness all exist together, each shaping the other. And Poseidon, in claiming the sea, did not divide it. He became part of its unity. The palace beneath the surface was not a place of power in the way the sky held power, nor a place of finality in the way the underworld held it. It was something quieter, a place of presence, a place where the sea did not need to move to exist, and from this place, unseen and largely unknowable, Poseidon would come to shape all that lay above, not always directly, not always visibly, but always, in some way, from below. The depths remained, silent, vast, unchanged, and yet no longer without meaning. For now the sea had a centre, and in that centre it had a god. In the stillness beneath the tides, where light dissolved into a dim and distant memory, the sea did not remain empty. It is a common imagining that the depths, being unseen, are without form, that what lies beyond vision must also lie beyond life. But the ancient world did not hold to this belief. To them, what could not be seen was often more alive, not less. Hidden things were not absent, they were simply waiting to be understood. And so, in the quiet dominion of Poseidon, life began to gather. Not suddenly, not in abundance, but in fragments, suggestions of presence that moved at the edge of awareness. Shapes that did not yet have names, motions that did not follow the patterns of the surface. The sea, having found its rhythm above and its stillness below, now began to fill the space between. The first of these beings were not creatures in the way later stories would describe them. They were closer to movements than forms. A slow drifting through the water, a shifting that suggested intention without revealing it. They did not rise toward the surface, nor sink deeper into the dark. They remained, suspended, as though the sea itself held them in place. Poseidon, in the quiet of his submerged domain, did not create them in a single act. They emerged. From the same vastness that had shaped the waters, from the same silence that had once held him, these presences took form. Not imposed, but allowed, drawn out of possibility into existence. There is something fitting in this, for the sea does not build life as the land does. It does not root or anchor. It carries, it surrounds, it gives space. And within that space, life becomes something fluid, something that belongs not to the ground, but to motion itself. Over time, these early forms began to take on more recognizable shapes. Long bodies that moved like currents, fins that caught the slow shifting of water, eyes, perhaps, though not yet bound to light, sensing rather than seeing. They did not move with urgency. There was no need. The sea provided, not through abundance, but through continuity. There was always water, always space, always the quiet rhythm that guided their existence. The ancients would later give names to some of these beings. They spoke of Nereus, a presence older than many gods, gentle and knowing, who moved through the waters not as a ruler, but as a keeper of its deeper truths, a figure who did not command the sea, but understood it, and of the Nereids, who embodied the softer movements of the water, the calm surfaces, the quiet shores that would one day form, the gentle interactions between sea and land. There were others, less easily defined. Beings that existed at the boundary between form and imagination, creatures that seemed shaped not only by the sea itself, but by the thoughts of those who would later try to describe them. Long, coiling forms that echoed the movement of waves. Vast presences that could not be fully seen, only sensed as they passed through the dark. These were not yet monsters, nor were they companions. They were simply part of the sea. Poseidon did not stand apart from them. He observed, but not as something separate. He existed among them as both presence and environment. The creatures did not bow, nor did they flee. They moved as they always had, guided by currents deeper than command. And yet there was a connection, subtle but undeniable. The sea, now alive in ways it had not been before, began to reflect the nature of its god more clearly. There was calm, yes, but also depth that could not be measured. There was beauty, but also distance. A quiet harmony that held within it the possibility of something less gentle. For life, even in its earliest form, carries within it variation. Not all movements were slow, not all presences were passive. Some creatures moved with a sharper intent, their forms more defined, their paths less wandering. They did not disturb the sea, but they altered it in small, almost imperceptible ways. A current shifted, a silence broke, a pattern changed. These were small things, but they mattered, for the sea, once a single body, had now become a world, not separate from the rest of existence, but distinct within it. A place where life followed different rhythms, where movement was not bound to the ground or guided by the sky. And in that difference, something new began to take shape. A quiet complexity. Poseidon, standing within this growing presence, did not seek to control it. He allowed it to unfold, just as the waves and tides had before. There is a certain understanding that comes from the sea, that what is forced will resist, but what is allowed will become. The creatures of the deep continued to emerge. Some would remain small, almost unnoticed. Others would grow vast, their presence felt more than seen. All of them, in their own way, carried a part of the sea within them, and the sea, in turn, carried them. There was no boundary between life and water, no clear line between what was alive and what simply existed. It was all one movement, one vast and unfolding expression. The depths, once silent and empty, were now filled with presence, not loud, not overwhelming, but undeniable. And in that quiet fullness, the sea became something more than a realm. It became a living world, endless, unseen, and only just beginning to reveal itself. For a long while the sea remained in balance. Its waves rose and fell with quiet certainty. Its tides returned without hesitation. Even the creatures that moved through its depths seemed to follow patterns that, while unseen, were rarely broken. It was not stillness, but it was not unrest. And yet, within all living things, whether water or sky or something between, there exists a threshold, a point where balance does not disappear, but deepens into something less predictable. The sea had learned how to move. Now it would learn how to change. It began not from below, but from above. The sky, vast and distant under Zeus, had remained largely untouched by the shifting rhythms of the waters. It stretched endlessly, Its presence felt more in its constancy than in any visible motion. But constancy too can shift. At first it was only a gathering, a subtle thickening of the air above the sea, though air itself was not yet something that could be fully described. The space between sky and water grew heavier, as though something unseen had begun to collect. The sea noticed, not in the way a creature notices, but in the way a body responds. The surface altered, slightly, almost imperceptibly. The waves, once even and measured, carried a faint irregularity, as though listening to something that had not yet made itself known. Poseidon did not summon this change. He felt it. There is a difference between creating a force and recognizing one, and the storm, in its earliest form, was something that belonged to both sky and sea, neither fully one nor the other. The first wind did not arrive with force. It passed across the surface like a thought, barely disturbing the water. A faint touch, moving without direction, without urgency, but even in its softness, it carried with it a new possibility. The surface of the sea responded, the waves shifted, no longer rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Their edges broke slightly, their patterns disrupted. It was not yet chaos, but it was no longer uniform. Then, slowly, the wind returned. Stronger this time. Not violent, but insistent. It pressed against the water, not as a single movement, but in layers, one current crossing another, creating tension where before there had been only flow. The sea did not resist, but it did not remain unchanged. The waves grew, not merely higher, but sharper, their forms more defined, their movement less predictable. What had once been a gentle rise now carried weight, a sense that the sea was no longer moving only from within, but in response to something beyond itself. The sky darkened, not in colour alone, but in presence. It is difficult to describe this moment, for it does not belong to a single sense. It is felt as much as it is seen, a gathering above, a rising below. Two vast forces, separate yet connected, beginning to move toward one another, and in that meeting something was born. The first storm did not break suddenly, it formed, a slow accumulation of movement and pressure, of wind and water, of rising and falling that no longer followed a single rhythm. The sea lifted, the sky pressed downward, and between them the space itself seemed to tremble. Poseidon stood within this, not as its creator, but as its witness, and, in time, its keeper. For the storm, unlike the wave or the tide, could not be contained within a single pattern. It did not repeat in the same way. It did not return as it had been before. Each storm was different, shaped by forces that extended beyond the sea alone. And yet, once it began, it could not be separated from him. The winds grew stronger, the waves rose higher. What had once been surface became force. The sea no longer moved only in rhythm, it surged. It collided with itself, rising in great arcs before falling back with a weight that had not existed before. The depths responded, currents shifting, creatures retreating into silence as the upper world transformed. This was not destruction. Not yet. It was revelation. The sea, which had shown its calm and its continuity, was now revealing something else, something less predictable, less gentle, but no less essential. Its power. The ancients, in their later telling, would often place the storm in the hands of Zeus, as though it belonged entirely to the sky. And there is truth in that, for the sky gives the storm its voice, its lightning, its sudden brilliance, but the sea gives it body. Without the waters, the storm would pass unnoticed, its winds fading into nothing. It is the sea that lifts, that answers, that transforms the unseen into something that can be felt. And in this shared creation, Poseidon found a new aspect of himself. Not only the keeper of depths, not only the guide of tides, but something more complex, a presence that could not be reduced to calm or stillness. The storm did not end as quickly as it began. It receded. Slowly, the wind softened. The waves, though still high, began to lose their sharpness. The sky lightened, not in a single moment, but in degrees, as though releasing what it had held. And the sea, though changed, did not break. It returned. But not to what it had been, for once the storm has been known, the sea carries its memory. Even in calm, there remains the knowledge that calm is not the only state. Poseidon, standing once more within quieter waters, did not seek to undo what had occurred. He allowed it to remain. For the storm was not an interruption, it was a beginning of another kind. Power, when it first appears, is not always recognized. It does not arrive fully formed, nor does it announce itself with certainty. It gathers, quietly, from what already exists. From movement, from tension, from the slow shaping of the world as it learns what it can become. The sea had found its voice in waves, its memory in tides, and its force in storms. But these were expressions, manifestations of something deeper that had not yet taken form. Poseidon stood within this growing vastness, not as a distant observer, but as something intertwined with it, and yet, even in that connection, there remained an absence, a need not for control, but for focus. It is here, in the quiet unfolding of myth, that the trident emerges. Not forged in fire, nor taken in conquest, but shaped as a reflection of what already was. The ancients would speak of it as a gift, crafted by the Cyclopes, those ancient beings who understood the making of things not through ornament, but through essence. They had given thunder to Zeus, a weapon that carried the voice of the sky. To Poseidon, they gave something quieter. A trident, three-pronged, simple in its form, yet vast in its meaning. It did not shine with brilliance, nor did it carry the weight of spectacle. It existed as an extension of the sea, of movement, of the unseen forces that shaped the waters from within. Poseidon did not seize it, he accepted it. There is a difference between holding power and becoming aligned with it. The trident did not grant him dominion over the sea, that had already been his. What it gave him was a way to speak to it, a way to gather the scattered motions of water into a single intention. When he first held it, nothing changed. The sea did not rise in sudden waves, nor did the depths tremble in recognition. The tides continued their slow return. The creatures of the deep moved as they always had. The storms, when they came, formed as before. But beneath that continuity, something subtle had shifted. The trident did not command, it resonated. When it touched the waters, even lightly, the sea responded, not as something controlled, but as something understood. A current might turn more sharply. A wave might rise with greater certainty. A storm might gather with a deeper coherence, its scattered energies drawn into a single direction. It was not force, it was clarity. The three prongs, so often depicted as symbols of power, carried a quieter meaning. They reflected the nature of the sea itself, its surface, its depths, and the unseen currents between. Not separate, but distinct. Not divided, but held together in a single form. Through the trident, Poseidon did not change the sea into something new. He allowed it to become more fully itself. There is a certain restraint in this. For power, when unchecked, seeks to expand, to impose, to reshape, to assert its presence. But the sea does not yield to such intentions easily. It resists not through defiance, but through vastness. It absorbs, it shifts, it returns. Poseidon, shaped by silence and by waiting, did not force the waters into obedience. he listened. And through that listening, the trident became not a weapon, but a bridge, between intention and motion, between presence and expression. The ancients would later tell of earthquakes, of the ground itself trembling when Poseidon struck the earth with his trident. They would speak of seas rising in sudden fury, of lands breaking apart under the force of his will. There is truth in these stories, but they are not the beginning. Before the trident became a symbol of destruction, it was something quieter, a means of connection, a way for the god of the sea to touch what had always been his, and to shape it not through dominance, but through understanding. The first time the sea truly answered him, it was not in rage, it was in alignment. A wave rose, not higher than others, not more violent, but more certain. It held its form longer, carried its motion further, and when it returned, it did so with a completeness that had not been there before. It was a small thing, but it was enough. For in that moment, the sea was no longer only becoming, it was responding, and Poseidon, holding the trident within the vast quiet of his domain, understood that power was not something to be declared. It was something to be carried gently, endlessly, like the sea itself. Before the land had fully settled into its contours, before paths were worn into the earth by the passage of feet, there existed a different kind of movement, one not bound to ground or guided by sky. It was swift yet fluid, powerful yet without weight. The sea, in its endless motion, had already begun to suggest forms within itself. Waves rose like backs arching beneath unseen force. Currents surged forward with a rhythm that resembled breath, or perhaps something closer to instinct. There was, within this movement, the outline of something familiar, though it had not yet been named. Poseidon, standing between the surface and the depths, began to notice it. Not as a sudden revelation, but as a quiet recognition. The sea did not merely move, it surged, and in that surge there was the suggestion of life shaped by speed and strength, a motion that carried both grace and force, not unlike the rhythm that would one day define the horse upon the land. It is said, in later tellings, that Poseidon created the first horse, but creation, in these older stories, is rarely an act of invention. It is an uncovering, a drawing forth of what already exists, waiting to take form. And so, from the meeting of wave and will, the horses of the sea emerged. They did not rise all at once. At first, they were glimpses, a crest of water lifting higher than the rest, holding its shape a moment longer, as though resisting its return. A surge beneath the surface, moving with a speed that did not belong to the slow currents below. A presence felt rather than seen, passing through the sea with intention. Then, slowly, they took form, long necks arched from the water, not breaking it, but becoming part of it. Bodies shaped by motion rather than mass, their forms defined by the very currents that carried them. Their manes were not hair, but spray, fine threads of water that caught the faint light before dissolving back into the whole. They were not separate from the sea. They were the sea, given shape. The ancients would call them the hippocampi, creatures of both horse and water, moving through Poseidon's domain with a quiet loyalty that required no command. They did not graze, nor rest, nor wander. They moved as the sea moved, guided by rhythms deeper than thought. Poseidon did not summon them, he rode with them. There is a difference. To command is to stand apart, to direct from a distance, but to ride is to join, to move within the same motion, to become part of what carries you. The first time he moved among them, the sea did not resist. It opened. The waters parted not as a path, but as a continuation. The horses surged forward, their movement smooth and unbroken, and Poseidon moved with them, not above, not behind, but within the flow itself. It is here that one begins to understand the nature of his power more fully. He does not stand over the sea, he moves through it. The horses carried him not to a destination, but through a state of being. Across vast stretches of water that had no beginning or end, through depths where light could not follow, into currents that shifted and turned without warning. And always there was rhythm, a steady, pulsing motion that echoed the tides, that mirrored the rise and fall of the waves. The horses did not disrupt this rhythm, they embodied it. There is something ancient in the connection between horse and sea. Even in later ages, when horses would run across the land, there would remain in them a memory of something older. The surge of their movement, the strength of their stride, the way they seemed to carry not just weight, but force. It is as though they remember the water. Poseidon, in shaping these beings, did not create servants. He revealed companions. They were not bound to him, yet they followed, not out of obligation, but out of alignment. Their movement matched his presence, just as the waves had begun to do, just as the tides returned, without needing to be called. The sea, in giving rise to them, had given shape to one of its own expressions. Speed, grace, power held within motion. The hippocampi moved endlessly, never tiring, never still. They carried the quiet energy of the sea into form, allowing it to be seen, if only for a moment, before dissolving once more into the vastness from which they came. And Poseidon, riding among them, became something more than a distant god. He became part of the movement itself, a presence carried not by force, but by flow. The sea did not need roads, it did not need paths, it had its own way of moving, and now it had its riders. For a long while, the sea seemed without interruption. Its surface stretched endlessly, broken only by the quiet rhythm of waves and the slow breathing of tides. There were no fixed points, no places where the water gave way to something solid. It was a world defined by motion, where nothing remained in one place long enough to be called still. And yet, beneath this movement, the earth had not disappeared. It remained, submerged, patient, and waiting. Gaia, though hidden beneath the vastness of Poseidon's domain, had not withdrawn her presence. She existed within the sea as much as she did beyond it, her form extending into depths unseen, her weight shaping the waters in ways that were not yet visible. The sea, though fluid, was not without foundation, and in time, that foundation began to reveal itself. It did not happen suddenly. There was no great upheaval, no violent breaking of the surface. Instead, there came a subtle resistance, a place where the water did not move as freely, where the currents shifted slightly, as though encountering something beneath them. At first, it was only a suggestion, a shallowing. The depths, once immeasurable, grew less distant in certain places. The waters, though still vast, began to carry within them the quiet presence of something rising. Poseidon felt this change, not as a disturbance, but as a recognition. The sea, which he had come to understand as both motion and depth, was now revealing another aspect, its relationship with what lay beneath. The first island did not emerge fully formed. It rose gradually, almost hesitantly, as though the earth itself was remembering how to meet the open air. The surface of the water lifted, parted, and then, without sound, gave way. Stone met sky. It was a small thing, a fragment of land surrounded on all sides by the endless sea. It did not tower or stretch. It simply existed, its presence quiet yet undeniable. The waves adjusted around it. They did not break in anger, nor did they retreat. They curved, they softened, they found new paths. The sea did not resist the island, it accepted it, just as it had accepted the shaping of its own depths. And in that acceptance, something new was created. A boundary. For the first time, the sea was no longer without interruption. There was a place where water ended and something else began. A place where movement met stillness, where the shifting surface gave way to solidity. This was not a division. It was a meeting. Poseidon did not see the island as an intrusion. He saw it as a counterpart. The sea, vast and uncontained, had now found something to shape itself against. The waves, once endless in their path, now had something to approach, to touch, to return from. The rhythm of the water deepened, not because it had changed, but because it had found something to answer to. More islands followed, not in great numbers at first, but enough to suggest a pattern, each one rising in its own time, each one carrying the quiet weight of Gaia's presence into the open world. Some remained small, barely more than stone breaking the surface. Others grew larger, their forms stretching outward, their edges shaped by the persistent motion of the sea. The ancients would later give names to these places. They would speak of sacred islands, of lands touched by gods, of places where the boundary between sea and earth held special meaning. But in these earliest moments, they were simply what they were, points of stillness within motion. Poseidon moved among them, not as a ruler imposing order, but as a presence observing change. The sea, which had once been uninterrupted, now carried within it variation. Currents shifted around these new forms. Waves broke differently, their patterns altered by the presence of land. Even the creatures of the deep began to gather near these rising edges, as though drawn to the meeting of two worlds. There is something enduring in this meeting, for the sea does not erase the land, nor does the land hold back the sea entirely. They exist together, each shaping the other over time. The water wears down the stone redirects the water. It is a quiet exchange, one that does not seek an end. The islands stood, not as challenges, but as companions, and Poseidon, watching the waters move around them, understood that the sea was no longer a single unbroken expanse. It had gained contrast. It had found something against which its movement could be felt more deeply. The endless had met the finite, and in that meeting both became more visible. The waves continued, the tides returned. The storms, when they came, would one day break against these shores. But for now, the islands remained still, rising gently from the sea, their presence soft yet certain. A reminder that even within endless motion, there can be places that endure. At first, the sea had no voice. It moved, it shifted, it carried its endless rhythms across the surface of the world, but it did so in silence. The waves rose and fell without sound, the tides returned without echo. Even the storms, in their earliest forming, were more present than expression. But the world was changing. With the rising of islands, the sea had found something it had never known before. A surface that did not yield. Stone did not move as water did. It did not bend, did not absorb, did not return in the same quiet way. It remained, and in remaining, it altered everything that touched it. The waves, which had once travelled endlessly without interruption, now met resistance. At first, the meeting was gentle. A wave would approach the edge of an island, its form still smooth, its motion steady. It would touch the stone, hesitate if such a thing can be imagined, and then soften, folding into itself before slipping back into the sea. There was no sound. Not yet. But there was a change. For the first time, the sea encountered something that did not become part of it, and in that encounter, something began to form. The next wave did not behave in quite the same way. It approached with the same motion, but when it met the stone, it did not simply fold. It broke. Not violently, not with force, but with a subtle disruption. its smooth surface fractured into smaller movements, scattering briefly before returning. And in that brief scattering, there was a trace of something new. A faint echo. It was not yet a sound that could be named, more like a suggestion, a disturbance that lingered for a moment longer than the movement itself. Poseidon, standing within the rhythm of the sea, noticed it, not as something separate, but as an extension of what was already there. The waves had always carried motion. Now, they were beginning to carry expression. The sea was learning to be heard. As more waves met the rising islands, the pattern deepened. Each meeting left behind a trace, a soft collision, a gentle breaking, a return that was no longer entirely silent. The water struck the stone, and in that contact, something invisible took shape. Sound. At first it remained quiet, a low murmur, barely distinguishable from the movement itself. But as the waves continued, rising, falling, returning, the sound began to gather. Not in volume, but in presence. It lingered, it repeated. It became part of the rhythm. There is something ancient in this transformation. For sound is not separate from movement, it is its echo, its continuation beyond what can be seen. The sea, which had already learned how to move and how to return, was now learning how to remain. The waves no longer vanished entirely when they fell. They left something behind, a soft, continuous voice that stretched along the edges of the islands, rising and falling in quiet persistence. The ancients, standing much later upon these shores, would come to know this sound well. They would hear it not as noise, but as something closer to memory. A repetition that did not tire, a presence that did not leave. But here, in its beginning, it was something new, something the sea itself had only just discovered. Poseidon did not shape this voice, he allowed it. There is a certain understanding in this, that not all expressions need to be guided. Some arise naturally, from the meeting of what moves and what remains. The sea, in touching the land, had found its echo, and in that echo it found continuity beyond motion. The sound of the waves did not speak in words. It did not carry meaning in the way language does. And yet it communicated something deeper, a sense of endlessness, of repetition without end, of movement that does not seek conclusion. It was a sound that did not begin and did not end, it simply continued. The waves grew more certain in their breaking, not more violent, but more complete. Each rise led to a fall, each fall to a return, and each return carried with it that same quiet voice. The sea had become not only a presence to be seen, but one to be heard. The islands, unmoving and silent, received this sound without response, and yet in their stillness they gave it shape. Without the land, the sea would have remained unheard. Without the sea, the land would have remained untouched. Together, they created something neither could hold alone. A rhythm that could be felt even in stillness, a sound that carried the weight of something infinite. Poseidon, moving through his vast domain, now carried not only the motion of the waters, but their voice. Not loud, not commanding, but constant. The waves continued to rise and fall, and with each return, they spoke, softly, endlessly, without ever saying the same thing twice. As the sea found its voice along the edges of the land, the world above began to gather into forms more deliberate. Islands, once quiet and unmarked, slowly became places of presence. The earth did not remain untouched by time. It shaped itself, and in that shaping it invited something new, beings who would walk upon its surface, who would look outward across the waters and wonder. They came not all at once, but gradually. Mortals, fragile, brief, and yet capable of perceiving the world in ways even the gods did not always share. They built, they named, they remembered. Where the sea moved endlessly and the land endured in silence, mortals created something in between, a sense of place, and in time, one such place began to rise along the edge of the water. A city. It did not begin as grandeur. It began as stone placed upon stone, as paths worn by repeated steps, as voices gathering where once there had only been wind and tide. It grew slowly, shaped by need as much as by vision. This city, standing between land and sea, carried within it a quiet question. To whom does this place belong? For the gods, though distant in their own realms, were never entirely absent. Their presence lingered, in the movement of the waters, in the shifting of the air, in the unseen patterns that shaped the world. And so, it was said that this city would choose its patron, not through force, not through conquest, but through offering. Poseidon came first. He did not arrive with spectacle. The sea, though vast, does not need to announce itself loudly. It is always there, always present, its power understood even in calm. And so his offering reflected his nature. He struck the ground, not with anger, but with certainty. From the place where his trident touched the earth, water emerged, a spring rising from stone, clear and immediate. It was a gift of connection, a reminder that even far from the open sea, his domain could reach. The water flowed, but it carried with it the taste of the sea, salted, ancient, not entirely suited to those who lived upon the land. Still it was powerful. Still it was undeniable. The people of the city stood before it, aware of what it meant. To accept this gift was to align themselves with the sea, with its depth, its movement, its unpredictability. But they did not decide immediately, for another had come, Athena. Her presence was quieter still. Where Poseidon had struck the earth, she simply touched it, and from that touch something began to grow, not suddenly, but steadily. A tree emerged, its roots finding their way into the soil, its branches reaching upward into the open air. An olive tree. It did not surge or command attention. It did not carry the weight of immediate force. But it endured. It offered shade, fruit, and oil, a gift not of power, but of continuity. The choice, when it came, was not made in haste. The people looked upon both offerings, the water that connected them to something vast and unknowable, and the tree that promised stability, growth, and quiet sustenance. And in the end, they chose Athena. The city took her name. It became Athens. Poseidon did not protest, not outwardly. The sea does not always answer refusal with immediate force. It withdraws, it deepens, it carries its response in ways that are not always visible at first. But something shifted. The relationship between sea and land, once only a meeting of elements, now carried memory. The waves that touched the shores near this city were no longer untouched by meaning. They carried with them a quiet awareness that they had been present, and yet not chosen. It is not anger in the way mortals might understand it. It is something quieter, a recognition of distance. The sea continued to move. The tides returned as they always had. The waves broke softly along the edges of the land. The sound of water meeting stone did not change in its rhythm, and yet, beneath that continuity, there was something else, a subtle tension. Not enough to disrupt, not enough to overwhelm, but enough to remain. Poseidon, in his vast and patient domain, did not forget, not in the way of holding on to grievance, but in the way the sea remembers every shore it has touched, every boundary it has met, every place where it has been allowed to remain, and every place where it has been turned away. The city stood, the olive tree grew, and the sea, just beyond its reach, continued its endless motion, close enough to be seen, close enough to be heard, but no longer fully its own. There are choices that shape more than a single moment. There are decisions that echo, quietly, through everything that follows, and the sea, though endless, carries those echoes with it. The city stood, and the choice endured. It did not fade with time, nor soften with distance. The olive tree took root, its branches stretching slowly into the open air, its presence deepening with each passing season. Beneath it, life gathered, measured, sustained, shaped by patience rather than force. And just beyond, the sea remained. It did not withdraw entirely. It did not turn its back upon the land that had chosen another. The waves still reached the shore, the tides still returned, the sound of water against stone continued its endless rhythm. But something within that rhythm had changed, not in movement, but in meaning. Poseidon did not forget the moment of refusal, not as a wound carried in anger, but as a quiet recognition that not all gifts are received, and not all presences are welcomed equally. The spring he had brought forth remained. It did not vanish with the city's decision. The water still rose from the earth where his trident had touched it, still clear in its appearance, still carrying within it the essence of the sea, but its nature did not change. It was not sweet. It was not easily consumed. It remained what it had always been, true to itself, yet unsuited to those who had hoped for something else. There is a certain stillness in such moments. When something is offered and not accepted, it does not always disappear. It lingers, holding its form, carrying with it the quiet knowledge of what it might have been. The people of Athens did not reject the sea outright. They continued to look toward it, to sail upon it, to draw from it what they could. The sea remained part of their world, vast, necessary, and ever-present. But it was no longer their chosen guide. That place had been given to Athena. And so, the sea became something else, not absent, not diminished, but distant. Poseidon, in his domain, did not act immediately. There was no sudden rising of storms, no breaking of the land in visible anger. The sea does not always answer in moments. It answers in patterns, in shifts that unfold over time. The waters near the city grew more complex. Not violent, but less predictable. The tides, though still returning, carried a subtle irregularity. The winds, when they passed over the surface, seemed to linger longer, as though considering whether to remain or move on. These were small things, easily overlooked. And yet, they were not without meaning, for the sea does not forget its nature. It does not become something else, because it is refused. It remains what it is, vast, shifting, and beyond full understanding. But where it is welcomed, it offers continuity. Where it is set aside, it offers distance. The spring remained as a quiet reminder, a presence within the land that spoke of what had been offered and not taken. Its waters, though clear, were not embraced. They stood apart, much like the sea itself, close enough to be seen, but not fully brought into the life of the city. Poseidon did not seek to reclaim what had been lost. He allowed it to remain. There is a kind of restraint in this, a recognition that power does not always need to assert itself to be present. The sea, in all its vastness, does not depend on any single shore. It does not diminish because one place turns away. And yet, every shore leaves its mark. The waves continued. They reached the land as they always had, rising and falling, touching and retreating. The sound of their meeting with stone did not change, but it carried within it something quieter now. A memory. Not of anger, but of absence. The city grew, the olive tree flourished, and the sea remained just beyond, endless and patient, its surface reflecting the sky, its depths holding what could not be seen. There are gifts that are accepted, and gifts that are refused. Both shape what follows, and the sea, in its quiet way, carries both equally, never forgetting, never demanding, simply continuing. Close to the land, but never entirely belonging to it again. Anger, in the language of the sea, is not always a sudden thing. It does not always rise like flame, nor does it declare itself in a single moment of rupture. More often it gathers, slowly, almost imperceptibly, beneath the surface, where movement is less visible but no less real. The waters near the land had already begun to change, not in ways that could easily be named, but in patterns that no longer followed their earlier calm. The tides returned, but not always with the same certainty. The winds passed, but seemed to linger, as though drawn into something deeper. The waves continued their endless rhythm, yet within that rhythm there was variation, subtle but persistent. Poseidon did not call this change into being. He allowed it. There is a difference between anger that seeks to destroy and anger that simply exists. The sea does not always choose to act upon what it holds. It carries it, lets it settle, lets it become part of its vast and shifting nature. And yet, what is carried does not remain without consequence. Far from the shores of Athens, beyond the places where mortals might stand and listen, the sea began to deepen its expression. The surface remained calm in appearance, but below, the currents moved differently. They turned more sharply. They crossed paths in ways that created tension rather than flow. The creatures of the deep, sensitive to even the slightest change, shifted their patterns. Some moved farther into the depths, seeking the older stillness that remained untouched. Others lingered near the surface, as though drawn to the growing unrest. The sea was not breaking, but it was no longer entirely at ease. Poseidon moved within this change, not as a distant observer, but as something connected to every shift. He did not give form to the anger, nor did he attempt to quiet it. He understood it as part of the sea's nature, as something that arises when balance is altered, when connection is strained. There is a quiet truth in this, that even what is vast can feel absence. The refusal of the city had not diminished the sea, but it had changed the relationship between water and land. What had once been an open exchange was now marked by distance, and distance, when carried long enough, can become something heavier. The first visible signs came not as destruction, but as disruption. A storm formed, stronger than those before it, though not yet overwhelming. The winds gathered with greater insistence, pressing against the surface of the water with a force that did not immediately release. The waves rose higher, their edges sharper, their motion less predictable. They did not crash with fury. They persisted. Again and again they reached toward the land, not in a single overwhelming surge, but in repeated attempts, each one slightly stronger, slightly more certain than the last. The shore held. The city remained untouched in its foundation, but the sound of the sea changed. What had once been a steady, endless murmur now carried a deeper tone, a resonance that lingered longer, that echoed against the stone with a weight that had not been there before. It was not a warning. It was a presence. The sea was no longer only what it had been. It had taken into itself something new. Anger, in this form, is not loud. It does not shout or demand attention. It waits. It gathers. It expresses itself in ways that unfold over time, shaping the world not through sudden force, but through persistence. The ancients, in their later tellings, would remember this aspect of Poseidon well. They would speak of storms that rose without warning, of seas that turned against those who crossed them, of a god whose favour could not always be known. But beneath those stories lies something quieter, a recognition that the sea is not only a place of movement and life, but of feeling, if such a word can be used. Not emotion as mortals experience it, but a kind of response, a reflection of what it encounters, what it carries, what it cannot entirely release. Poseidon did not unleash this upon the world. He became its keeper. The storms, when they came, were not punishments. They were expressions, moments when the sea revealed more of itself than it usually did, moments when its depth, its power, and its complexity rose closer to the surface. And then, Just as slowly, they would pass. The waves would soften, the winds would quiet, the sea would return to its steady rhythm. But it would not be the same. For once the ocean has known this deeper movement, it does not forget it. The quiet anger remains, not always visible, not always felt, but always present, beneath the surface, moving in ways that cannot be fully seen. And Poseidon, within that vast and shifting expanse, remains with it, not as its cause, but as its constant. A presence that does not deny what the sea has become, but allows it to be, endlessly, patiently, and without end. There comes a moment, in the long telling of the sea, when it is no longer only a realm of gods. The waters, once untouched by mortal presence, began to carry something new, fragile vessels, shaped from wood and intention, moving across a surface that did not belong to them. They did not glide as the hippocampi did, nor did they move with the quiet certainty of currents. They resisted, and in resisting, they revealed something different. Mortals had come to the sea. At first, they stayed close to the land. The islands, rising gently from the waters, offered a sense of direction, a reassurance that the world did not end beyond sight. The waves, though endless, were familiar near the shore. Their rhythm could be watched, their patterns slowly understood. But curiosity, once awakened, does not remain still. There were those who looked beyond the nearest horizon and felt something cool, not loudly, not with promise, but with a quiet insistence, a sense that the sea was not only a boundary, but a path. And so they ventured outward. Among them was one who had come to be remembered, not for his strength, nor for his certainty, but for his endurance. Odysseus. He did not set out to conquer the sea. He did not seek to master it, nor to claim it as his own. His journey was shaped by other forces, by war, by return, by the long and uncertain distance between departure and home. And yet, it was the sea that would define him. Poseidon watched, not with constant attention, nor with immediate judgment, but with the quiet awareness that belongs to something vast. The wanderer moved across his domain, carried by winds he did not command, guided by stars he could not fully trust, and always surrounded by waters that could not be predicted. The sea does not treat all who enter it the same. Some pass over its surface with little resistance, their journeys brief, their paths clear. Others find themselves drawn into its deeper patterns, their movement shaped not only by direction, but by circumstance. Odysseus was one of these. His path did not remain straight. It turned, it circled, it delayed. What should have been a short crossing became a long wandering, not because the distance changed, but because the sea itself unfolded differently around him. There were calm days, moments when the waters lay almost still, reflecting the sky in a way that made the world seem endless and quiet. The ship moved slowly, its progress steady but uncertain, as though time itself had softened. And then there were storms, not always violent, not always overwhelming, but enough to shift direction, to obscure the path, to remind the wanderer that the sea is not a place to be crossed without consequence. The ancients would say that Poseidon himself opposed Odysseus, that the god, in quiet anger, turned the waters against him, delaying his return, shaping his journey into something far longer than it needed to be. There is truth in this, but it is not the whole truth, for the sea does not simply punish, it reveals. Odysseus, in his wandering, came to know the sea not as a single thing, but as many, a place of calm and unrest, of guidance and confusion, of distance that could not be measured in simple terms. He learned to listen, not always successfully, not always in time, but enough to endure. The waves carried him forward, and then away. The winds opened paths, and then closed them. Islands appeared when they were needed, and vanished when they were left behind. The sea did not offer him a straight road, it offered him a journey. Poseidon, within this vast unfolding, did not act as a constant force against him. He was present in the patterns that shaped the journey, in the storms that redirected, in the currents that delayed, in the distances that stretched longer than expected. The wanderer was not lost. He was being carried. Not toward a single destination, but through a series of moments that would define him more than any arrival could. There is something in this that reflects the deeper nature of the sea. It does not promise return. It does not guarantee direction. It offers movement, and within that movement, those who travel upon it must find their own way, not by mastering the sea, but by enduring it. Odysseus continued. Through calm and storm, through presence and absence, through days that seemed to repeat and nights that offered no certainty. His journey did not belong to him alone. It belonged to the sea that carried him, shaped him, and refused to let him pass unchanged. And Poseidon, constant and unseen, remained within it all, not always as an obstacle, but always as a presence. The wanderer moved across the endless waters, and the sea, in its quiet and shifting vastness, moved with him. The sea does not always oppose, though its storms may rise with force, and its waves may seem to turn against those who cross it. There exists within its vastness another kind of motion, one that does not seek to break, but to redirect. A movement not of rejection, but of quiet correction. For those who travel upon the waters, this distinction is rarely clear. A storm, when it gathers, does not announce its purpose. The winds do not explain themselves, nor do the waves reveal their intention. They rise, they press, they alter the course of all that moves upon them. To the mortal eye, it is chaos. To the one who endures it, it is something else. A turning. Poseidon, who had once allowed anger to settle quietly within the depths, did not shape every storm with intent to punish. The sea, in its complexity, had grown beyond such singular expression. It carried many possibilities within it, and not all of them led to ruin. There are storms that destroy, but there are also storms that prevent. The difference is not always seen in the moment. A ship, caught in rising winds, does not know whether it is being driven away from danger or toward it. The horizon disappears, the familiar patterns of the sea dissolve, and direction becomes something uncertain. What once seemed clear is lost, replaced by movement that cannot be easily understood. And yet, when the storm passes, something remains. A change in course, a shift in distance, a different shore than the one that had been expected. The ancients, in their long memory of the sea, began to understand this. Not fully, not always, but enough to sense that the waters did not act without meaning, that even in their most turbulent moments there was a pattern, subtle but present. They would speak of sailors who survived not because they fought the storm, but because they allowed themselves to move with it, who did not resist every wave, but learned when to yield, when to wait, when to trust that the sea, though vast and unpredictable, was not entirely without direction. Poseidon, within this, was not always a force of opposition. He was, at times, a guide, not in the way of clear paths or visible signs, but in the shaping of movement itself. The storm, when it rose, could close one path and open another. It could carry a ship away from what it sought, only to bring it closer to what it needed. This is not comfort. It does not make the storm gentle, nor does it remove its danger. The winds still press with force, the waves still rise with weight, and the sea still reminds all who cross it that it cannot be mastered. But within that reminder, there is also a quiet offering, a chance to be redirected. There is a certain humility required to understand this, for mortals often seek control, to set their course, to follow it, to arrive where they intend. The sea does not always allow this. It shifts, it alters, it introduces uncertainty where certainty was expected. And yet, in doing so, it reveals something deeper, that not all paths are meant to be followed as they are first imagined. The storms in their rising and passing become part of a larger movement, not interruptions, but moments within a greater pattern. They do not exist outside the journey, they shape it. Odysseus, wandering long across the waters, came to know this in fragments, not as a clear truth, but as something felt through repetition. Each storm that turned him away, each delay that extended his journey, carried within it a quiet redirection. He did not always understand it, but he endured it, and in enduring, he moved not only across the sea, but through it, through its changes, its resistances, its unexpected openings. The sea in this way becomes something more than a challenge. It becomes a guide that does not speak. Poseidon does not offer directions. He offers movement, and within that movement, those who travel must find their own understanding, not in opposition to the sea, but in relationship with it. The storms rise, they pass, the waters settle. But the course has changed, and in that change, something new begins. The sea continues, endless and patient, carrying within it both resistance and direction, both danger and possibility. Not choosing for those who cross it, but never leaving them unchanged. Not all who crossed the sea did so in defiance. There were those who did not see the waters as something to overcome, but as something to be understood, if not fully, then at least enough to move within it without resistance. They did not seek mastery, they sought alignment. These were the sailors who listened. They stood at the edge of the land before departure, watching the surface of the water as though it might speak, and in a way it did, not through words, but through movement, through subtle variations that revealed more than they first appeared to hold. The waves, even in their quiet rhythm, were not identical. Some carried a steadiness that suggested openness, a path untroubled by sudden change. Others moved with a slight tension, a tightening that hinted at shifts beyond the horizon. The wind, too, moved differently from one moment to the next, not always stronger or weaker, but altered in its direction, its persistence. To most, these were small things. To those who listened, they were signs. Poseidon did not speak to them directly. He did not offer guidance in the way of clear instruction, nor did he reveal the path ahead. But his presence existed within these patterns, within the quiet language of the sea itself. And some learned to hear it. They did not rush their departure. They waited. A day, sometimes more, watching the waters shift, observing the wind as it moved across the surface, noting the way the tide returned. There was patience in this, a willingness to remain still until movement made sense. When they finally set sail, it was not with certainty, but with awareness. The sea did not become predictable. It did not offer them safety in the way land might, but it allowed them to move within it with a different kind of understanding. They adjusted their course not only by sight, but by feeling, the pull of the current, the resistance of the wind, the rhythm beneath the visible waves. There is a quiet humility in this way of travelling, for it accepts that the sea cannot be controlled, only followed. That direction is not always fixed, but must be found again and again in each moment of movement. The sailors who listened did not avoid storms entirely. No one could. But they sensed their coming sooner. A shift in the air, a subtle gathering of tension in the water, a change in the way the waves rose and fell. These became warnings, not always clear, but enough to alter their course, to prepare, to endure. And when the storms arrived, as they inevitably did, these sailors did not fight them with the same urgency as others. They adjusted. They lowered their sails when needed, turned their vessels with the movement rather than against it, allowed themselves to be carried when resistance would only bring greater harm. This did not make the storms gentle, but it made survival possible. The ancients would remember such sailors not as conquerors of the sea, but as those who respected it, who understood, in their own quiet way, that the sea does not reward strength alone. It responds to awareness. Poseidon, within the vastness of his domain, did not distinguish between those who listened and those who did not. The sea moved as it always had, but those who listened moved differently within it. They returned more often, not always without loss, not always without change, but with a continuity that others did not share. Their journeys, though shaped by the same waters, followed paths that felt less broken, less scattered. There is something enduring in this. A recognition that not all knowledge comes from force or certainty. Some of it comes from stillness, from observation, from the willingness to remain quiet long enough to notice what others pass by. The sea does not hide its nature, it reveals it, slowly, through repetition and variation, through patterns that shift just enough to be seen by those who look closely. And Poseidon, though silent, remains within those patterns. Not as a voice, but as a presence. The sailors who listened did not claim to understand him. They did not name his intentions or define his will. They simply moved within what he was. And in doing so, they found a way to cross the endless waters, not by mastering them, but by becoming part of their rhythm. The sea continued. The winds shifted. The tides returned. And those who listened remained, quietly, within it all. Where the land met the sea, something began to gather. Not only stone, not only the slow shaping of settlements into cities, but intention. A quiet recognition that the boundary between water and earth was not merely a place of meeting, but a place of presence, where something unseen seemed to linger, constant yet distant. The waves arrived, again and again. They did not tire, did not falter, did not forget their path. They reached toward the shore, touched it, and returned, carrying with them a rhythm that no hand had shaped and no voice had taught. To those who lived along these edges, the sound became familiar, not background, but companion. And in time, familiarity deepened into reverence. The sea could not be held. It could not be shaped into walls or measured into fields. It remained beyond possession, beyond certainty, and yet it sustained, it carried, it connected. It offered passage, but never without risk. It gave, but never entirely without taking. It was, in every sense, something that required acknowledgement. And so the first temples began to rise. They did not emerge all at once, nor were they grand in their earliest form. A simple structure, placed upon higher ground where the sea could still be seen. Stones arranged not for shelter, but for marking, a space set apart where attention could be given. These were not places to contain the god, they were places to face him. Poseidon did not dwell within walls. His domain stretched far beyond any boundary mortals could build. But the temples, standing at the edge of his vastness, created a point of connection, a place where the finite could acknowledge the infinite. The offerings were simple. A libation poured into the earth, as though returning something to the waters below. A carved figure, left to weather the salt air and the passing of time. Words spoken softly, not always in hope of being heard, but in recognition that something greater was present. There was no expectation of response. The sea does not answer in ways that can be easily traced, and yet the act of offering remained. There is something enduring in this gesture. To stand before something that cannot be fully known, and to acknowledge it not as something to be feared alone, nor as something to be controlled, but as something to be respected. The temples reflected this understanding. They were not built deep inland, far from the reach of the sea. They stood close, sometimes on cliffs that overlooked the endless waters, sometimes near the shore where the waves could be heard even in silence. The wind moved through them, the salt gathered upon their stones. They were not separate from the sea, they existed within its influence. The ancients would later build greater structures, columns rising against the sky, carved with care, aligned with the horizon, temples that seemed to hold both the stability of the land and the openness of the sea within their design, places where sailors would come before departure, where they would pause, look outward, and offer what they could, not to ensure safety, but to acknowledge uncertainty. For the sea, in all its vastness, does not promise return. It offers possibility, and that possibility carries both hope and risk, both passage and delay. The temples did not change this. They did not quiet the storms or steady the waves, but they gave shape to something else. A relationship. Poseidon, though unseen, remained present in every movement of the water beyond those stone edges. The waves that struck the shore below carried the same rhythm as those far out at sea. The tides that rose and fell did so without regard to the offerings made above them. And yet, something connected them. The act of building, of placing stone upon stone at the edge of the infinite, was itself a form of listening. A recognition that the sea was not merely a place to cross, but a presence to be acknowledged. The temples stood, through wind and weather, through calm and storm, through years that passed without notice. Some would erode, their edges softened by time, others would remain, their forms enduring even as the world around them changed. But all carried the same quiet purpose: to face the sea, to stand at the boundary and recognize that beyond it lay something that could not be fully understood, but could not be ignored. The waves continued. The sound of their endless return reached the temples, filled the spaces between the stones, and moved onward again. And Poseidon, vast and patient, remained beyond them, not contained, not diminished, but acknowledged, in silence, in stone. In the quiet act of looking outward where the land ends and the sea begins, there comes a place where the land no longer offers direction. Paths that once stretched with certainty begin to fade. The ground, familiar and measured, gives way to something less defined. And beyond that, always, there is the sea, waiting, not as an invitation, but as a continuation of what cannot be fully known. To those who lived near it, the horizon became more than a line. It became a question. The ancients did not see the world as endless in the way later ages might imagine it. For them, the known had boundaries, not fixed, not always visible, but felt. And at the edge of that knowing stood the sea, vast and unbroken, stretching outward into something that could not be easily described. It was here that the idea of the world began to change. Sailors, who had once remained close to the islands and familiar shores, began to move further. Not all at once, not without hesitation, but with a growing sense that the horizon was not an end, but a threshold. And yet, each journey outward carried with it a quiet uncertainty. For the sea does not reveal what lies ahead. It does not unfold like land, where each step brings something into view. It holds its distance, its surface reflecting the sky in a way that conceals more than it shows. The farther one travels, the less the past remains visible, and the future offers no clear shape. Poseidon existed fully within this uncertainty. Not as a guide in the way mortals might wish, but as the presence that defined the space itself. The farther one moved from the shore, the more his domain revealed its true nature, not hostile, not welcoming, but vast beyond measure. The edge of the known world was not a single place, it shifted. What was once distant became familiar. What was once imagined became real. And yet, beyond each new discovery, there remained another horizon, another stretch of water that extended further still. There is something both compelling and unsettling in this. To move towards something that cannot be fully reached, to seek an understanding that always remains just beyond grasp. The sea, in this way, became not only a physical boundary, but a reflection of something deeper, a limit not of space, but of knowing. The ancients spoke of distant waters, of places where the sun seemed to linger differently, where the stars aligned in unfamiliar patterns. They imagined currents that carried ships beyond return, and depths so vast that no measure could contain them. These were not always tales of fear. They were expressions of distance, of the recognition that the world extended beyond what could be seen, and that the sea was the path into that extension. Poseidon did not change as sailors moved further into his domain. He remained constant. The waves rose and fell as they always had. The tides returned with their quiet certainty. The storms, when they came, did so without regard for how far one had travelled or how much one understood. But the experience of the sea changed. For those who remained near the shore, it was a companion, a presence that could be watched, heard, and, in some measure, anticipated. For those who moved beyond, it became something else, a vastness, a space where direction lost its clarity, where the familiar signs no longer held the same meaning. The stars above, though constant, required interpretation. The winds shifted without warning, the waters stretched in all directions, offering no fixed point by which to measure progress. And yet, some continued, not because they understood the sea fully, but because they accepted that they would not. There is a certain quiet courage in this, not the boldness of certainty, but the willingness to move forward without it. The edge of the known world, then, was not a place to be reached. It was a place to be carried through. Each journey outward became part of a larger pattern, one that did not end, but extended. The sea did not close behind those who travelled it. It remained, always open, always continuing, and Poseidon, within that endless expanse, remained as well. Not as a barrier, but as the presence that made the boundary possible. The horizon lingered. It did not come closer, no matter how far one travelled. It remained just beyond reach, a quiet reminder that the world was always more than what could be held within a single view. The sea moved, the sky reflected, and the edge, though never fixed, remained, a place where knowing ended. And something else began. There comes a point when even the most careful lines begin to fail. Maps, as they were first drawn, did not attempt to capture the whole of the world. They marked what had been seen, what had been returned from, what could be spoken of with some measure of certainty. Coastlines were traced where the land held still long enough to be remembered. Islands were placed where they rose reliably from the sea. But beyond these markings there was space left open, not empty, but unknown. At the edges of these early maps, the lines did not close. They faded. Ink thinned into suggestion, and suggestion into absence. What lay beyond was not denied, but it was not defined. It was here that the sea became something else entirely, no longer simply a path between known places. It became the space where knowledge itself gave way. The waters stretched outward without measure, carrying within them distances that could not be charted, currents that could not be predicted, and depths that could not be sounded. Poseidon did not change at these edges, but the way he was understood did. Closer to shore, he could be imagined, his presence felt in the rhythm of waves, in the rising of tides, in the shaping of storms that came and passed. Temples could be built, offerings made, his nature reflected upon. But where maps ended, imagination began to deepen. The sea, no longer framed by land or guided by familiar routes, became a place of possibility, not always in the sense of discovery, but in the sense of uncertainty. It held what had not been seen, what had not been named, what might never be fully known. The ancients did not always fear this, but they respected it. They spoke of distant waters not with clarity, but with care. Stories emerged, not always as claims of truth, but as attempts to give form to what lay beyond the reach of certainty. Creatures that moved beneath the surface, vast and unseen, currents that carried ships beyond return, islands that appeared and vanished as though they belonged more to the sea than to the land. These were not simply inventions, they were reflections of the understanding that where knowledge ends, something else takes its place, not always danger, not always wonder, but a mixture of both. The sea, in this way, became a boundary not of land, but of comprehension. Sailors who ventured into these regions did so with a different kind of awareness. The patterns they had learned closer to shore did not disappear, but they became less reliable. The winds shifted with less predictability. The stars, though constant, seemed more distant, their guidance requiring greater interpretation. And the water itself felt different, not in substance, but in presence. It stretched further than the eye could follow, and without the interruption of land, it carried a sense of continuity that could be both calming and unsettling. There were no markers, no fixed points, only the steady movement of the sea itself. Poseidon, within this vastness, was no longer a presence that could be approached. He became something more distant, not absent, but less defined. The sea did not reveal him fully here. It did not offer signs that could be easily read. Instead, it held its silence more deeply, its patterns less clearly. The farther one moved from the known, the more the sea returned to something closer to its origin, a vast, patient expanse that did not explain itself. There is a quiet truth in this, that not all things are meant to be fully understood, that some parts of the world exist beyond the reach of naming, beyond the comfort of certainty. The maps, in their incompleteness, acknowledge this, not as a failure, but as a recognition of limits. Where the lines ended, the sea continued, endlessly, without boundary, without conclusion. The sailors who returned from such journeys did not always bring clear accounts. Their stories carried fragments, moments of calm that seemed too vast to describe, storms that rose without warning, nights where the sky and sea became indistinguishable. They spoke not with precision, but with impression. And those who listened understood that what lay beyond the maps was not simply more of the same, it was something different. Not because the sea changed, but because the understanding of it did. Poseidon, in these distant waters, remained as he always had, present, vast, and beyond full comprehension. But he was no longer framed by the familiar rhythms of shore and tide. He became something closer to the infinite. The maps remained unfinished, their edges open, their lines incomplete, and beyond them the sea continued. Not waiting to be filled in, not waiting to be known, but simply existing, as it always had, stretching outward into a distance that could not be measured, a place where certainty ends, and the unknown remains. Beyond the edges of maps, where distance loses its meaning and the horizon no longer promises arrival, the sea begins to change. Not in its surface. The waves continue their endless rise and fall, the tides return with their quiet certainty, and the winds pass as they always have. To the eye, little seems different. The water reflects the sky, the horizon stretches outward, and the rhythm remains unbroken. But beneath, there is another movement, a deepening. The ancients, standing upon ships that drifted farther than most dared to travel, began to sense it, not through sight, for the surface reveals very little, but through a subtle shift in presence. The sea in these distant places felt heavier, not in weight alone, but in meaning, as though it carried something more. Poseidon was no less present here than near the shores, but his presence changed in its expression. Closer to land, he could be felt in the breaking of waves, in the pull of tides, in the shaping of storms that rose and passed. Here, he became quieter, not diminished, but deeper. The surface, though familiar, began to feel like a threshold rather than a place of certainty. Beneath it, the waters extended far beyond what could be measured. The depth was no longer an idea, it was a presence. The descent did not begin with movement downward, it began with awareness. A recognition that the sea was not a single expanse, but layers, each one holding something different, each one moving in ways that did not always reach the surface. The waters below carried their own currents, their own stillness, their own forms of life that did not seek the light above. Sailors, though they remained above, could sense this. There were moments when the sea seemed to pause, not in stillness, but in quiet. The waves continued, but their sound felt distant. The wind passed, but without urgency. It was as though the surface had grown thin, and beneath it something vast waited without revealing itself. Some would turn back, not out of fear alone, but from a recognition that what lay ahead was not meant to be fully entered, that there are places where the sea is no longer simply a path, but a presence too deep to be crossed without consequence. Others continued, not because they understood, but because they felt the pull. There is something within the unknown that calls, not loudly, not clearly, but persistently. A quiet invitation that does not promise discovery, but suggests it. And for some, that is enough. The descent, then, was not a single act. It was a passage, a movement from what could be seen into what could only be felt. The sea, once a surface to travel across, became something layered, something that held more than it revealed. The creatures of the deep, which had long existed beneath the reach of light, began to shape this awareness as well. Their presence, though rarely seen, was not entirely hidden. There were moments, brief, uncertain, when something moved below, large enough to be felt through the water itself. A shifting, a passing, gone before it could be understood. These were not encounters, they were suggestions. The sea did not reveal its depths all at once. It allowed them to be sensed, piece by piece, never fully, never clearly. It held its secrets not out of refusal, but because they belonged to a different kind of existence. Poseidon, within this deeper realm, was not a figure to be imagined in form. He became something closer to the sea itself, a presence that could not be separated from the waters, that existed not above or within, but as part of the entire expanse. The deeper the sea was understood, the less distinct he became, not disappearing, but expanding beyond definition. There is a quiet shift in this. The god of the sea, once seen in waves and storms, now revealed himself in depth. In the vastness beneath movement, in the silence beneath sound, in the unseen currents that shaped everything above them. The descent had begun, not into darkness alone, but into understanding that could not be fully held. The The surface remained. The sky still reflected, but below, something waited, not to be discovered, but to be encountered, slowly, incompletely, and never in full. The sea continued outward, and downward, and within that downward stretch the world grew larger, not in what could be seen, but in what could not. The descent did not end, it only deepened. The descent does not happen all at once. It is not a sudden fall into darkness, nor a sharp crossing from one world into another. It unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, as though the sea itself resists any abrupt separation. The surface remains above, still moving, still reflecting the sky, but with each passing depth, its presence begins to loosen. Light lingers at first. It reaches downward in softened fragments, stretched and broken by the shifting waters. What was once clear becomes diffused, scattered into pale ribbons that no longer illuminate, but only suggest. The shapes of things begin to blur, edges lose their certainty, motion becomes something felt rather than seen. And then, without a clear moment of passing, light begins to fade. Not gone, never entirely gone, but diminished. The deeper one descends, the less it remains a source of clarity. It becomes memory instead. A distant echo of something that once revealed the world, now unable to hold its form. Poseidon does not resist this fading. He exists within it. For the sea, in its deeper reaches, is not meant to be seen in the way the surface is seen. It does not offer itself to the eye. It holds itself differently, through presence, through depth, through a quiet vastness that does not rely on light to exist. The creatures that move here understand this. They do not search for brightness. They do not depend on what has been left behind. Their forms shift with the water itself, guided by currents, by pressure, by senses that do not belong to sight. They move without hesitation, as though the absence of light is not a loss, but a condition they have always known. There is a stillness here, but it is not empty. It is filled with movement that cannot be easily traced. Slow drifts that pass without sound, shapes that emerge and dissolve before they can be held in understanding. The sea does not conceal them, they simply exist beyond the reach of clear perception. The descent continues. Above, the waves still rise and fall, the winds still cross the surface, the tides still return in their endless rhythm. But here, those motions are distant. Their influence remains, but their presence does not. The deeper waters hold their own patterns, subtle, steady, and largely untouched by what happens above. This is not separation, it is distance. A difference not of place alone, but of experience. The ancients, imagining these depths, did not always attempt to define them fully. They spoke of darkness, yes, but not as emptiness. They understood that what lies beyond sight is not without form, only beyond easy knowing. The fading of light did not erase the world, it revealed another layer of it. Poseidon, in this quiet expanse, becomes less a figure and more a condition. He is not seen moving through the water. He is the water, not in the sense of identity, but in presence. His domain is no longer something he stands within, it is something that expresses itself through him, and through which he is expressed. The deeper the sea becomes, the less distinction there is between God and realm. There is a quiet inevitability in this, for what begins as something separate often returns to something unified. The sea, once observed from above, now reveals itself from within, not through clarity, but through immersion. The fading of light is not an ending. It is a transition, a movement away from what can be easily grasped into what must be felt, endured, and accepted without full understanding. There are no landmarks here, no shores, no islands, no edges against which movement can be measured, The sea extends in all directions, its depth as vast as its surface, its presence unbroken and continuous. Time, too, begins to shift. Without the rising and setting of light, without the visible passage of the sky, moments lose their shape. The rhythm of the surface no longer guides perception. What remains is something slower, less defined, a sense of continuation without clear beginning or end, and within this, the sea holds its deepest silence. Not the silence of absence, but of completeness. A space where nothing needs to announce itself, where existence does not require recognition to persist. The waters move, the creatures drift, the unseen currents shape what cannot be seen, and all of it continues without interruption. Poseidon remains, not above, not below, but within, a presence that does not diminish as light fades, but becomes more profound in its absence. For where sight cannot reach, presence must be understood differently, not through form, but through awareness. The descent does not stop, it deepens. Light fades further until it is no longer something that defines the world. It becomes a memory carried from above, a reminder of a different way of seeing that no longer applies. And yet, the sea does not become less, it becomes more vast, more silent, more itself. The surface, far above, continues its endless motion. But here, in the quiet where light has almost disappeared, the sea reveals its truest nature. Not as something to be seen, but as something that simply is. Endless, unseen, and without need of light to exist. Where light has nearly withdrawn, the need for naming begins to fade. Names belong to the surface. They arise where things can be seen, compared, remembered. A form appears, and it is given a word so that it may be held within thought. But in the deeper waters, where outlines dissolve and certainty loosens, naming becomes less certain. The sea does not insist on it. Here, existence continues without the need to be defined. The creatures that move within these depths are not unknown in the sense of being hidden. They are present, undeniably so, but they do not offer themselves to understanding in the way surface life does. Their forms shift, their movements resist clarity, and even when they are sensed, they do not remain long enough to be fully grasped. They are not meant to be fixed in memory. They pass, and in passing, they leave only an impression. Poseidon does not shape them into singular forms, he allows them. As the sea allowed the first waves, the first tides, the first stirrings of life itself, so too does it allow these beings to exist without boundary. They are not bound by the expectations of land or light. They do not need to resemble what is known. They simply are. Some move like drifting shadows, vast, slow, almost indistinguishable from the darkness that surrounds them. Their presence is not seen directly, but felt as a shift in the water, a quiet displacement that lingers for a moment before settling again. Others are smaller, though size loses meaning in such depths. They move in patterns that do not repeat, guided by currents that twist and turn without reaching the surface. Their motions seem deliberate, yet without urgency, like thoughts that form and dissolve without needing to be completed. There are those that carry faint glimmers, not light as it exists above, but something softer, an inner trace that appears and disappears, not illuminating the darkness, but interrupting it. These brief signals do not reveal form. They suggest it, then withdraw, leaving behind only a memory of movement. The ancients, imagining such beings, spoke of creatures beyond naming not as monsters, but as presences. They did not always attempt to describe them fully, perhaps because they understood that description would not hold. What lies beyond the reach of light cannot be easily translated into form, and so they left them unnamed, not out of neglect, but out of recognition, that some things exist without needing to be understood. The sea, in this deeper state, does not separate life from its surroundings. The creatures do not stand apart from the water. They are carried within it, shaped by it, indistinguishable from it in many ways. Their boundaries are not fixed. Their forms do not remain constant. They belong to movement. Poseidon, within this realm, becomes something less distinct as well. He is not seen guiding these beings, nor commanding their presence. He does not gather them or disperse them. He exists among them as part of the same vast condition, a presence that does not need to assert itself to be felt. There is a quiet unity here, not harmony in the sense of balance or order, but something deeper, a coexistence without conflict, without hierarchy. The creatures move, the currents shift, the darkness holds everything together, and nothing demands more than its place within it. Time, if it can be felt at all, moves differently. Without light to mark its passage, without repetition to measure its return, it becomes something less defined. The creatures do not hurry. They do not pause. They continue as the sea continues without beginning or end. There is no need to arrive, no need to return, only movement within a vast and continuous presence. The deeper one imagines this realm, the less it resembles a place. It becomes something else, a state of existence where form is fluid, where identity is not fixed, where life does not require recognition to persist. The creatures without names are not incomplete, they are simply beyond the need to be named. And in that, there is a kind of quiet completeness. The sea does not diminish them by leaving them undefined. It preserves them, for to name something is to limit it, to hold it within a boundary that can be remembered and repeated. These beings exist outside such boundaries. They remain open, shifting, part of a world that does not close around them. Poseidon, present within this, does not change them. He allows them to remain as they are, unseen, unspoken, and yet undeniably real. The descent has carried the world into a place where certainty no longer holds, where light fades, where forms dissolve, where names lose their meaning. And still, the sea continues, holding within it life that does not seek to be known, only to be. Endless, silent, and free from the need to be understood. There is a silence that belongs only to great depths. It is not the absence of sound, nor the quiet that follows disturbance. It is something more complete than either, a condition in which sound itself no longer travels as it once did, where motion continues but does not announce itself, and where presence exists without needing to be heard. The sea, in its upper reaches, had always carried a voice. Waves broke and returned. Winds crossed the surface. The meeting of water and stone created a rhythm that could be followed, even in darkness. But here, far below where light had faded and forms had loosened, that voice no longer remained, not because it had been taken, but because it was no longer needed. Poseidon does not speak in this place, not in waves, not in storms, not in the patterns that shape the surface world. His presence remains, but it is no longer expressed through movement that can be easily sensed. It becomes something quieter, more constant, like the depth itself. The silence is not empty, it is filled. Currents move through the darkness, slow and deliberate, carrying with them the unseen weight of the ocean. Creatures pass, their forms barely distinguishable from the waters that surround them. The vast body of the sea continues its endless shifting, but without sound to mark its passage. Everything is happening, nothing is heard. There is a difference between silence and stillness. The deep is not still. It moves, but in a way that resists detection. The motions are too large, too slow, too integrated into the whole to stand apart as separate events. A current does not announce its direction. A passing presence does not break the quiet. It simply becomes part of it. The ancients, when they spoke of such depths, often did so with restraint. They did not fill this space with noise or chaos. Instead, they left it open, acknowledging that there are places where the world withdraws from expression, not as absence, but as completion. For what would sound mean here? What would it carry? There are no shores to receive it, no air to hold it, no ears to interpret it in the way surface beings understand. Sound, as it exists above, belongs to interaction, to the meeting of forces, to the collision of movement. But in the deep, there is no collision, only continuation. The silence, then, is not a void. It is a state where nothing needs to declare itself. Poseidon exists fully within this, not as a distant figure overseeing the sea, but as something inseparable from it. His presence does not echo here. It does not move outward or return. It remains, constant and unbroken, like the depths themselves. There is a kind of gravity to this silence, not in weight, but in presence. It draws everything into itself, not by force, but by inevitability. The deeper one imagines descending, the more the world above seems to loosen its hold. The memory of sound fades, the sense of movement changes, the need for distinction begins to dissolve. And what remains is something quieter, something more complete. The creatures of the deep move within this silence without disrupting it. They do not create noise, nor do they seek it. Their existence is not marked by sound, but by presence alone. They pass through the water, their forms merging with the darkness, their movements blending into the slow and steady currents. Nothing stands apart. Everything belongs. Time, too, becomes difficult to hold. Without sound, without light, without the repetition of familiar patterns, it no longer moves in ways that can be easily followed. There is no beginning to mark, no end to anticipate, only continuation. The sea, in this deepest state, becomes something beyond rhythm. It becomes something closer to permanence, not unchanging, but unbroken. The silence holds it all together. It does not press or confine, it allows. There is no need for expression here, no need for motion to be heard or seen. The sea exists fully within itself, without the need to reach outward. And Poseidon, within this vast and silent expanse, becomes something more than a god of movement or storm. He becomes a presence of depth, a constant that does not require attention, that does not seek recognition, that remains whether it is known or not. The silence does not end. It does not lift or recede. It continues, as the sea continues, without interruption. Far above, the waves still speak, the winds still move, the world still turns with sound and light and motion. But here there is only this, a depth without voice, a presence without echo, a silence that is not the absence of the world, but its most complete form. Endless, unbroken, and at rest, even as everything within it continues to be. There are forces that announce themselves through change, and there are those that remain beneath it. The sea, in all its visible forms, has revealed both. It rises in waves, retreats in tides, gathers itself into storms, and softens again into calm. These movements shape the world at its edges, leaving marks that can be seen, heard, and remembered. And yet, beneath this shifting surface, there exists something that does not follow the same pattern. Something that does not rise or fall. Poseidon belongs to this deeper condition. He is not only the force behind the storm or the hand that stirs the waves. These are moments, expressions that pass, however powerful they may seem. They begin, they unfold, and they fade back into the greater body of the sea. But what they emerge from, and what they return to, remains. This is where his presence endures. To look upon the sea from its surface is to see motion. To stand within its depths is to encounter something else entirely, a continuity that does not depend on change to exist. It is not stillness in the sense of absence, but a form of completeness that does not need to move to be real. Poseidon, within this, becomes less a figure and more a condition of being. There is no single place where he resides, not only in the crashing of waves against the shore, nor solely in the quiet chambers beneath the surface. He is not confined to the moments when the sea makes itself known. He is present in the intervals as well, in the long stretches where nothing seems to happen, where the waters move without drawing attention to themselves. It is here that his nature is most fully revealed. The ancients, seeking to understand what could not be easily grasped, gave him form. They imagined him rising from the sea, trident in hand, shaping the world through visible acts. These images endure because they offer something tangible, a way to see what is otherwise difficult to hold. But beneath these forms lies something less defined. For the sea does not always need to be seen to be present. Even far from its shores, it remains within memory, within imagination, within the quiet awareness that something vast exists beyond immediate reach. Its absence is never complete. It lingers, even where it cannot be touched, and so does Poseidon. Not as a figure waiting beyond the horizon, but as a presence woven into the very idea of the sea. Wherever the waters exist, in movement, in depth, in silence, he exists as well. This is not a presence that intervenes at every moment. It does not direct each wave or determine each current. The sea does not require constant guidance. It moves according to patterns that have already taken form, rhythms that continue whether they are observed or not. Poseidon does not stand apart from these patterns. He is part of them, and yet he is not limited to them. There is something paradoxical in this. To be both within the movement and beyond it, to be expressed through change, yet not defined by it. The sea offers a reflection of this paradox. It is always shifting, and yet it remains what it has always been, vast, uncontained, without final boundary. So too does Poseidon remain. There are moments when his presence feels closer. In the rising of a storm, when the sea gathers itself with sudden force. In the pull of the tide, when the waters return with quiet inevitability. In the deep, where silence holds everything in a kind of suspended completeness. But these are only moments. They do not contain him. They reveal him, briefly, before returning to the larger whole. The sailors who crossed the sea sensed this in fragments. They did not always name it, nor did they always understand it. But they felt it, in the unpredictability of the waters, in the way the sea could shift without warning, in the sense that something larger than their journey existed all around them. They learned over time not to seek control, but to recognize presence, for the sea does not yield to those who try to master it. It continues, indifferent to intention, shaped by forces that extend beyond any single will. And yet, it does not exclude those who move within it. It carries them, shapes them, and returns them changed. Poseidon, within this vast and enduring expanse, does not stand as an external ruler. He exists as an internal constant, a presence that does not begin and does not end, that does not require acknowledgement to persist, that remains whether it is understood or not. The waves will continue to rise and fall, the tides will return and withdraw, the storms will gather and pass, and beneath all of this, something will remain unchanged, not fixed in form, but constant in existence. The sea does not conclude, it does not move toward an end, it extends, outward, downward, and inward, beyond what can be fully traced, and within that endless extension, Poseidon is not a figure passing through time. He is something that remains with it, always present, always enduring. As long as there is water that moves, depth that holds, and silence that surrounds, he is there. There is no final horizon. No place where the sea concludes itself, where its movement ceases and its presence fades into something else. It does not arrive at an ending, nor does it gather itself into a final form. It continues beyond sight, beyond measure, beyond the reach of any single telling. The sea has always been this way. From its earliest stillness, before waves found their rhythm, before tides learned their return, it carried within it the quiet certainty of continuation, not as a destination, but as a condition, a vastness that does not seek to become something else, but remains as it is, endless. Poseidon, whose presence has moved through every part of this story, does not stand at the edge of this vastness. He is within it, not as something guiding it toward an end, nor as something holding it in place, but as a presence that exists as long as the sea itself exists. His story, like the waters he belongs to, does not conclude. It extends. There are those who have tried to define the sea, to measure it, to map it, to give it boundaries that can be understood and remembered. And in doing so, they have come close, but never fully. For every line drawn, there remains something beyond it. For every depth sounded, there lies something deeper still. The sea does not resist this, it simply continues. There is a quiet acceptance in this truth, that not all things are meant to be completed, that some exist not to reach an ending, but to remain in a state of becoming that never resolves into finality. The sea, in all its movement and silence, holds this understanding without needing to express it. It does not ask to be known entirely, it does not offer itself in full, and yet it remains present, always near, always within reach, always extending beyond what can be held. The waves that break upon the shore are part of this endlessness. They rise, they fall, they return, each one separate, yet all belonging to the same continuous motion. No single wave defines the sea, no single moment contains it, and still each one carries something of the whole. The tides follow, their steady return marking a rhythm that does not end, only repeats in quiet variation. They come and go, not to complete a cycle, but to continue it. The storms, too, belong to this. They gather, they pass, they reshape what lies at the edges, but they do not bring the sea to an end. They reveal its force, then leave it to continue, as it always has. Even the depths, silent and unseen, are part of this endlessness. They do not close. They do not resolve. They extend downward into a vastness that mirrors the surface above, different in form, but not in continuity. And within all of this, Poseidon remains, not as a figure moving from beginning to end, but as a presence that does not follow such a path. He does not arrive, and he does not depart. He exists within the sea's endless unfolding, part of its continuity rather than separate from it. There is no final act, no concluding moment where his story is finished. For to end his story would be to end the sea itself, and the sea does not end. The ancients understood this, even if they did not always say it directly. Their stories did not seek to close the world into a single complete shape. They allowed it to remain open, unfinished, carrying within it the possibility of continuation. Poseidon, like the waters he belongs to, was not confined to a single narrative. He moved through many, each one revealing something different, none of them final. This is the nature of what endures. It does not resolve, it remains. The sea, stretching outward beyond the last visible horizon, carries this truth in every movement. It does not promise an ending. It does not offer completion, it offers continuation. And within that continuation, there is a kind of quiet permanence, not fixed, not unchanging, but always present, always returning, always extending beyond what can be fully known. The shore remains behind, the horizon remains ahead, and between them the sea continues, endless, unbroken, and without final boundary. Poseidon does not stand at its edge. He does not look beyond it. He exists within it, as it exists within itself. And so, the story does not close. It fades, like the sound of distant waves, not into silence, but into something ongoing, something that does not end, but continues beyond the telling. The sea remains, without end,